Hey everyone, how's it going tonight? Miss Ladybug came to see us. Are you back down to a 2-dog home, or do you still have your
I am
buddy?
back down to a 2-dog home. I'm done babysitting my friend's dogs.
Awesome.
She has ladybugs on her collar. It's funny.
Yes. Well, thank you everyone for joining us here tonight. We have a very special guest. We have Dr. Lauren Hughes, who is the exotic veterinarian in my area. She's been absolutely wonderful. She treats my sugar gliders, chinchillas, rabbits, dogs,
Everything.
reptiles, everything. Yes. So she works for our local zoo as well. So if you guys have any questions about exotics or veterinary care while we're in, feel free to drop them in the chat. But we got a lot of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Dr. Lauren in and we'll get things started.
We got a lot of questions.
We have a lot. I know. We have a lot.
We're about to put you to work.
Hey, how's it going?
Fine. Good. How are you guys doing?
Good.
How about yourself?
Say that again.
How about yourself? You doing
Oh, yeah. We're good. Good. Yep. Just halfway through the week. Getting there.
Hump day, man.
That's right.
Dude, why do we do this on hump day?
I don't know, but
Why?
it's a nice midweek break, right? There you go.
There you go.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lot of work for me and Liz.
Half the time I don't know what day it is anyway. Like people will be like, it's Friday. And I'm like, oh, yeah,
Sure.
yeah, it's Friday.
Yeah.
Whatever you say.
Exactly.
Dude, I was supposed to ship snakes yesterday, like a whole bunch of them.
Oh,
This dude
man.
bought like a bunch, and I was like, I have it on my calendar, ship it on Wednesday. I was supposed to ship it Tuesday for Wednesday delivery, but I
Oh,
didn't even make the label because I thought it was Tuesday, but it's definitely
Funny.
Wednesday today.
no. There you go.
All on that one. But
All right, Lauren, we're going to start out here. Kind of just an intro. Tell us a little bit about
Sure.
yourself, where you're from, how long you've been a vet, all that fun kind of stuff.
Sure. So I'm Lauren Hughes. I am a Quad City native, so I've lived right on the east side of the Mississippi River on the border of Illinois and Iowa forever. I went to school at our local Catholic grade school in East Moline when it was St. Anne's. I went to United Township High School in East Moline, and then went to the University of Illinois. Studied under some really cool people there, was down there for 8 years. So have a bachelor's degree in animal science with pre-veterinary concentration, and then went on to veterinary school at University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana for another 4 years. We were actually the first class that went through the integrated curriculum. So we were one of the only vet schools where your first 8 weeks of vet school, you actually were in the clinic to start. And so it was a whole different view on teaching. We joked and called ourselves like class guinea pig the entire time. And some stuff worked, some stuff didn't. In the end, I don't regret that aspect of it. I think that integrated curriculum worked really well for me and my learning style. And then I came back to the Quad Cities where I grew up. I was married. My husband lived here. And so we decided that this was where we were going to end up unless some sort of crazy twist of fate happened, because you never know. During undergrad, I actually shadowed under Dr. Kathy Van Buren, who was the main exotic vet in our area. And she was getting towards a point in her career where she wanted to go down to part-time, maybe retire, all that. And so I actually came back 3 years later after shadowing and staying in touch with her, came back for an internship for about 6 weeks, my last year of vet school. And after I left, they called and offered me a job. So I didn't take boards yet. I didn't do anything. Like, I was not a vet yet.
Yeah.
So they were like, obviously got to pass all that, which was fine. I wasn't worried about that. And then came back and started working here, and I've been an animal family in Davenport, Iowa ever since. I started here in May of 2013, 5 days after I graduated, and I haven't left. So, and then I also work as the veterinary health director at Niabi Zoo in Coal Valley, Illinois. So I run that whole program. I see everything from the tiny little dart frogs up to the giraffe. I do all of it. And I'm the only vet out there. I have a couple people on call that can help me once in a while if I need help. And other zoos in the Midwest have been very helpful in helping with some of the bigger stuff if we need to deal with that. but I started out there on my own in the fall of 2013, and just kind of revamped a lot of stuff we're doing out there, and taking that to the next level. I don't think people understand how much goes on behind the scenes in a zoological setting either. It's a lot different than just you're seeing something on display. That's part of it, but there's actually a lot that goes on in between. And I think I'm one of the only ones who sees reptiles in about an hour and a half radius of where we are. Because I think one of the next closest vets, they're in like closer to Peoria, Springfield area, or up towards Chicago, or out towards Iowa City. So, I mean, really, there's a couple other people in the area who will point you in the right direction, but from the aspect of seeing them on a consistent basis, it's me and Dr. Kathy, and Dr. Kathy's on her way out to retire, as she well deserves. She's been doing this a long time. So
I heard that she's going to retirement. I was like, no, she's my backup vet.
We have to find another me.
Yes, exactly.
Now it's your turn.
Yes, it is my turn.
Pass that torch of knowledge.
Yes, and she's wonderful. I'm gonna miss her so much, but I'm so happy that she gets to go be a grandma and have all her fun with that. And it's really cool. I really love it, and I get to meet a lot of cool people and do a lot of cool stuff. So that's me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you see yourself, like, did you go into vet school planning to work with exotics, or were you doing more of cat, family stuff? Like,
yeah. So I get that question a lot. I went in, I knew that I wanted to be a vet. Like, I'm your typical cliche. Like, I've known I wanted to be a vet since I was 5. That's true. I mean, I was never going to do anything else. I mean, I had a brief backup plan of opening a bakery if shit went real south. But I always knew it was what I was going to do, and I just didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So what's really awesome about the pre-veterinary program at Illinois is you get tons of exposure to a ton of different aspects of veterinary medicine, like stuff you wouldn't even consider. And so, like, I'm artificial insemination certified in large animals. Yay.
That's big in the Midwest.
Yep,
a lot of that goes on.
I
know everything get bred. Yeah.
Yep. We learned all that. We learned a ton about nutrition with like livestock and companion animal nutrition. I mean, there's aspects of that have veterinary guidance that people don't know about. Like, I don't know if you all, I'm going to name drop, and I don't care because he's a wonderful man, but Mark Mitchell, I don't know if you've heard his name, but he's one of the main designers through Flukers. Mm-hmm. He was my teacher in vet school. So like, there's a lot of cool stuff that we got exposed to that you wouldn't necessarily get everywhere else. I knew that I didn't want to do just dogs and cats. And I know that sounds really like, there are some people who do just dogs and cats and love it. And I think that's great. And there's an absolute need for that. I knew that if I was in an office 24/7, I would lose my mind. And so knowing I was coming back to, a very agriculturally based location, I knew at a minimum I was going to do some sort of mixed practice, whether that be dog, cat, cow, dog, cat, horse, dog, cat, hobby farm, that was all on the table. And then I got involved with wildlife medicine and birds of prey and conservation. And I actually got a job at NIABI during undergrad as a seasonal zookeeper. And I worked as a seasonal zookeeper there for 6 years. And a lot of that was like, okay, I'm going to end up here somehow. Oh God, the lights are automatic. I'm back, I promise. So, I think I just knew that I wanted to be part of something bigger, and it's not to say that people's dogs and cats are not important. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But there's aspects of conservation and leaving the planet better than we found it, and aspects of biodiversity that we're screwing up all over the place. Like, stuff like that is so important. And I felt very drawn to that level of work for sure.
Good. Yeah. Because we've lost so many species, and sometimes I feel very like when we go to big shows, Liz and I, and we see all the species. I feel kind of bad sometimes about being a ball python breeder, because no matter what way I slice that pie, right, I'm just recreating the Python Regis. Whereas over the past 2 decades, look how many monitor species we've lost.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's amazing. And no one understands like the level of reptile biodiversity that's within, certain just small sectors of the world is so impactful. They help regulate insect populations. They help regulate wild bird populations. There's a whole cascade of events related to reptile, conservation that people I don't even think comprehend, because everyone thinks about the mammals like they're the sexy animals, right? Like they're huge and they're cool and they're snuggly, and no one looks at the reptiles and thinks like, well, these guys are making that's just not, it's not a sexy thing to promote for conservation.
Yep.
It's just, they aren't the cute fluffy things that you get all the hype about.
Turtles though.
Oh God, everyone loves turtles. Except everyone thinks a tortoise is a turtle. So that's the other problem, right?
Yeah.
Like that is not a turtle.
Yes.
It's a tortoise. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yes. The turtle saved the reptile industry.
Yes. So that's the long answer is no, I didn't know I always wanted to. No, I didn't know I always wanted to get into it. But once I fell into it, then I was never going to look back, for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Damn, so you see a lot of reptiles, I'm sure.
I see a lot of reptiles, yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some of the common illnesses you see consistently rolling through your clinic?
Sure. I mean, the ugly truth of it is, the ugliest things I see are really tiny things that like hatched 2 days ago that are being sold as good pet options in the pet store. I don't want to throw them under the bus because they're victims of the bigger picture, but I really get discouraged when, I get this little kid who's so excited, has done all his research and comes in with this like 10-gram Darwinism, hasn't even had a chance to take effect yet, little bearded dragon that hatched 2 days ago. And it's like, oh, okay, his heart's going to be broken. I'm not going to like set him up to fail, but it's challenging to get those guys going. So unfortunately, I mean, I just see a lot of things that are failure to thrive in the beginning because they're just sold way too small. I have a lot of conversations with people about if they want a good quality animal to either look into rescuing one that's older, that like they haven't, that someone had and just was overwhelmed by or was uninformed, ignorant about, whatever, get something that's stable. Anything that's like over 50 grams of body weight is ideal, because I feel like anything less than that, there's the failure to thrive rate is just so much higher. I talk to people a lot about breeders because I don't think they think about that as an option for bearded dragons, or ball pythons or really any reptile. I don't think they think of a breeder as much as you would in the dog cat industry.
Yes,
and then it just is the same in the dog cat industry. Not all breeders are created equal either. And I work with a lot of them, and we have a lot of good ones in such a small area. Actually, I'm actually very, I feel really good about a lot of the breeders that I work with. But the ones that are coming to me are the ones that are seeking vet care. So I don't know the ones that aren't. So that's the other part. But that's the same with like the Amish down in Amana that like turn out puppies left and right. So it's the same across the industry in some regards. So failure to thrive is one of the hugest ones I'll see. I mean, by far and away, so much of the illness that I see is related to inappropriate husbandry. Whether that be, there's always the UV debate. It's nocturnal. It doesn't need, we get in, I'm sure we'll talk about that later with some of the new stuff. I'm sure that's on the list. Yeah, I'm sure that's on the list. But, so there's a lot of husbandry things. I think that unfortunately, there are a lot of people who rely on the pet store to give them really good information when they're setting up these animals, and that's just not always the case. So I think there's a lot of ignorance tied with just lack of information or knowledge of where to find good information. So I think husbandry is huge. I think that's one of the most underrated things. And I have a lot of breeders who come in that I have, they've never had a problem, and then all of a sudden we've got shedding issues or retained eye caps, and they've been rack purists for years. And we talk about how, not everything is made for a rack, and some of them do really well in racks. And I'm not saying they don't. I'm not anti-rack. I don't care. I definitely live and die by, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, if they're doing fine, leave them alone. But if they're not, then there's stuff we need to change. And that, it's the same across the board, right? Like, we're all all three of us looking at each other right now are Caucasian people who live in the United States. I can guarantee that my lifestyle is not the same as yours, and there's different reasons for that. It goes the same with some of the reptiles. It's like, listen, the rack's not working for it, so we got to figure out something else. And so we talk a lot about just flipping the mindset of A to B to C, and sometimes we have to modify along the way. But it's interesting. I think husbandry across the board is a very underrated conversation, because resolving a lot of those issues resolves tons of the diseases we see.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I imagine you see a lot of RI. I feel like that's like the most common thing that people ask me. Hey, my snake or my lizard or whatever has a respiratory infection.
RI, scale rot, mouth rot, and it won't eat. And 9 times out of 10, it's all husbandry.
100%. Husbandry and hormones, like those are kind of my top 2 things.
Yep.
And it's very hard to relate, because a lot of the mammal species don't do that. And I think, people with the not eating topic in particular, because that's one I get a lot. And listen, if someone can find the magical cure to make a ball python eat consistently, I'd love to hear it, because I'd be out of a job probably. Yeah. It's insane. Yeah. But I'll tell people, their metabolisms are totally different, and everyone loves to love through food. And it's like, what hasn't eaten in 2 weeks? Well, has it lost any weight? No. Okay. Well, we've got plenty of things we can do about that, And so I think a lot of that aspect of owning a reptile is very under discussed. Like, a lot of my first appointments are, what do you have? Here's what you need to get. What do you need to buy? And that's okay. I would rather have someone come seeking that information and do a consultation that way before they're in the weeds and come to me 2 years later with an animal that can't lift its pelvis because it's so jacked from metabolic disease. I mean, it's better to do it early. Yeah.
God, that's such a scary thought.
Sure. What is some of the worst information you hear people say that they're given at like a Petco or PetSmart?
Oh, preach! I want to hear
by other, even by some of these breeders we're talking about, right?
So here's the thing. I think the biggest problem is perception of value. Okay, so if someone looks at their dog and cat, I feel like they look at them very differently than they look at a lizard or a snake, right? So for people who are new to the reptile world or have never entered the reptile world, they look at that as intrusive, a pest, a nuisance, scary, slimy. There's all these things that are there, but a dog and a cat for most people, and I would say dog first, cat second, is a family member, right? Yep. So I think people are willing to invest more with gaining information, with cost of care, health care, those sorts of things, lifestyle. I think they're willing to invest more in that as a perception of value, as opposed to the $25 to $60 bearded dragon they get, and then they think, okay, cool, that's it. And they're not as willing to look into how to keep that thing alive for as long as possible, because in their mind, it's more replaceable, like a fish, And then so I think that skews a lot of what I'm able to do depending on who I'm seeing, because, and that's not right or wrong. It's just more, that's how it fits into that person's life. And so I think that's why, oh my God, this is going to drive me nuts. I think that's why that we don't have as many things developed in veterinary medicine related to longevity and reptile husbandry that we do in other areas, because people weren't as interested in finding that out until more recently. Like, we're probably 50 years behind the dog and cat industry in figuring that stuff out what makes sense for preventative care, what recommendations do we do. I mean, that stuff's changing all the time. In dogs and cats, we're at a pretty steady state with that for the most part. I mean, things still change. There's new information that comes out with new studies and all that, new vaccines, but from a reptile standpoint, we're like behind the 8 ball, because people weren't investing in that before. But now there's this new peak in interest. And so I think one of the most important things for me is trying to get that information out there. Like, there is preventative care you can provide. There is annual recommendations for the reptiles that you have. There are things that I need to see them for. Like, it's not just stuff you can remedy over the internet with your friends. Like, there's a reason I went to school for what I went to school for. So, that part of it, I think, is interesting. And so in figuring out, how severe, how bad, it's hard to say, because I never want to throw anyone under the bus, because I think there's just misinformation across the board. I think more so it's that I think things need to be marketed differently. Like, this is not just something that's replaceable. Like, this is something that has a value behind it. And so I think if that aspect of things was skewed, I'd be seeing a lot less of what I'm seeing. Like, if I see a pet store sell one more iguana, I'm going to lose my mind, because they are horrible pets. They are horrible pets. And I like iguanas. They are horrible pets.
Yeah, I think they're cool animals, but I would never keep one.
Yeah, they're terrible pets. They just are. But that was like the sexy reptile forever. Everyone had an iguana until they realized that they're not domesticated in any way, and they're not going to be, and they're very, very unpredictable. So,
right. You get your one, right? You get that one person that has this iguana that's amazing. It's like, all right, but where are the 600 that are biting people's fingers off? Yes.
Or chasing the female members of the house around the house, which is always my favorite.
Yeah. Yes. And there's always pets for everyone, right? But not every pet is for every.
Exactly. 100% agree. Yeah.
We have our Asian water monitor, kind of going back to preventative care. Yep. Dr. Lauren's seen him many times. We get him dewormed twice a year because we feed him live. All that kind of stuff. That is not a pet for everyone. He's big. He takes a lot of space. I just bought a 300-gallon pond to put in my basement for this water monitor.
100%. Yeah, it's just not for everyone. And it's the same sort of thing. Like, I'm sure you guys see it at shows. If I see one more quarter-size sulcata sold as like a really good idea above the Mason-Dixon line, it's like, listen, this thing, unless they're making a whole separate carport in the garage for it to live in the winter, this is going to be a terrible scenario for someone. Like, you're literally setting people up to fail. So,
and you're going to have to will it to your grandkids, not your kids, your grandkids.
100%. And I see, I'm one of the only ones in the area who sees birds too. And I have this conversation all the time. I think I offend people over the age of 50 on a regular basis when I say, what is your plan for this 5-year-old bird that is going to outlive you? Because it's going to outlive you. Like, these are the things that I think just aren't even on the radar when you're looking at getting one of these animals, because it's just not something you think about right away.
So no one thinks about the end goal. They think about, there's this cute, or there's this pretty, or there's this thing in front of me, and I want it. I want to fulfill my own desire. They don't necessarily take what's best for the animal into consideration in that moment.
Well, I mean, the number one culprit, I think, that I see for that are the Savannah monitors. Like, they're coming back in popularity. They're adorable. I mean, there is not much cuter than a hatchling Savannah monitor. Oh my God, they're so cute. They are not easy. They are not an easy animal at all. And they're aggressive. I mean, a lot of them are not super handleable. And their husbandry is not simple. I mean, they're much more of a carnivorous reptile, which changes the game in the lizard world quite a bit. So, it's just different. Yeah.
Yep. And when you are dealing with an animal that has a feeding response because it's not domesticated, it's completely different. Once an animal gets into that mindset, like, there is a strategy to handling them when they are in that feeding mode. Whereas, like, we're used to our dogs, right? We like throw the treat or the food bowl down on the ground. And they're not going to charge at you and not, to get the food.
100%. More often than not, they're not going to try to latch onto your wrist to grab the tongs. It's just not something that happens.
Exactly. Obviously you see it in dogs that have had food issues, right? Which is going back to more of a, now that is an instinctual thing that has happened. Well, over the, many, many years, we've had domesticated dogs. They've lost that instinct. Well, reptiles have not, if ever, will have lost that instinct yet of, that's food, that's not. Or this is my, so.
100%.
This is pretty good. Check this out.
Yeah, I would believe that. I would totally believe that is true. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I'm pretty confident I offended one of my clients when I asked her about it. And I was like, listen, There's no guarantees that this macaw is going to like your kid. I'm just telling you, you need to have a plan. The macaw doesn't, they just don't like anybody. I love birds. I would never own one. I would never own one, but I love them. I love working with them. It's just we're talking about animals that aren't in that same level of domestication, if at all, compared to dogs and cats. And I think that's one of the things that's very misunderstood as well. I think that's one of the problems.
Right. People ask me, like, have you ever been bit by your monitor? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, that doesn't bother you? It's like, no, number one, they've all been my fault. Every single one of them has been stupid, keeper, mess up, right? And it's like, it's not a domestic animal. Like, when people ask me, do they bite or does he bite? It's like, he sure can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so can your dog, but it's just like you're messing with something that has not been domesticated for years. Especially mine, we know he's wild caught. You can look at him and tell that he's a wild caught animal.
100%
easy. But I think you're right. People don't understand that difference in years and years of domestication and people in the reptile industry. We see it more now. If you have a species that is 3rd, 4th, 5th generation captive born and bred, they're, you can buy a wild caught Asian monitor for $200. You're buying a captive bred one for $2,000.
Yeah.
Because their attitude is so much different.
100%. So much. And I think the other thing that people don't realize when you're talking about owning a reptile as a pet versus a dog and cat.
Yes.
Dog and cats are environment adaptable for the most part.
Yep.
Reptiles, it's like, this is their environment. It's not like this is their environment, kind of. No, like, this is where they live.
Yes.
Like, this is their natural history. This is their native region. Their entire metabolic functions are controlled by that environment. Yes. So I think that part is just very foreign, like, thinking. It's just not instinctual for a lot of people. And I think that makes owning them challenging too.
For sure.
Yeah. People don't realize that, they depend on that environmental heat for digestion, autoimmune response, every organ function, all that.
Absolutely.
Stuff, especially the ones that have more than one stomach.
For sure.
To separate that, it's ridiculous.
For sure.
Research, people.
That's right.
Yes.
And if you don't know where to do your research, your vet is a great place to start. Like, it's so amazing. I know, it's really surprising. But like, I would be.
You mean you could send us research papers and stuff on like where to find this information?
I could even here's a thought. I could even have you come in for a pre-purchase consultation.
What?
Where you come and sit down with me and get, a half an hour to talk about, this is what I want. What do I want? What do I need to do?
You do that like via Zoom call or face chat.
Yeah, I could do that, or you could come in person in the office and set an appointment with me.
Exactly
here's the thing, and I guess this is just an adage in the vet industry, and I'm gonna get on my vet soapbox a little bit, okay? Because I can, and I'm going to. So, the vet industry does a lot for very little money in comparison to what your general practitioner in the human world would do for you. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Example, an appointment to see me is $59. Okay. Your copay at your human practitioner is probably somewhere between $15 and $30. If you just talk to a nurse practitioner or a PA, your actual exam fee is about $375. That is if you didn't have insurance, right? If you actually see a doctor, your exam fee is more like $475, $525. And you see your doctor for a whole, 5-8 minutes?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You get me for almost the whole appointment half the time. I mean, really, unless there's something crazy going on that I can't stand there very long. And that part I think is very disheartening, because it's like, listen, I'm already not charging you an arm and a leg to come in, so just come in. Come in. Please just come in. I have knowledge that I would like to give you. I worked really hard to get that knowledge. I would like to, be compensated for working with you and giving you that knowledge, but also I'm a real human being, and I am like invested in how your animal does and how you get to care for them. So, because that's a reflection on me. Like that's how I feel. Like if your animal does poorly, you know, and we've done everything we can, I feel bad about, I genuinely go home and feel bad about that. Right. And so that I get on my vet soapbox a little bit because I think that we run into a lot. Well, I don't want to pay to come in. Dude, I get that. But if you're dropping $200 to $3,000 on these things, come in.
Like, and how much money are you going to save?
Right.
Not having to come in 6 months from now and be like, it's got this and this and this and this, and here's all the stuff.
It's so much easier for me to just see it from the beginning. My favorite thing ever is when someone comes in and thinks something's wrong, and I get to send them home and be like, nope, you're good. Like, that makes me happy. I don't want your pet to be sick. I don't want a problem for you. But I also don't want to see you in the 11th hour and tell you your options are non-existent. I mean, and that's the reality. A lot of what I see, you know, is emergency level care because again, it goes back to perception of value. The perception is that like, we're not going to see it unless it's really, really bad, or there's nothing else I can do for it unless it's really, really bad. And then, I mean, I can do a lot, but I am not God and I am not a miracle worker. So, you know, I can do a lot, but there's some extremes. It's like, God, I wish I'd just get you in on a regular basis. And it just doesn't always happen. So,
and we've been on both ends of that spectrum. I've gotten rescued. You remember that
horrible
Mexican
snake?
Black king snake?
Yes, I do.
I got it as a rescue. Nightmares. We didn't even know it was a Mexican black king when it came in. Like, we were sitting there debating this thing on so many levels of suction, and we got it from
because it was so messed up you couldn't tell.
I couldn't figure out what it was.
Tell what it was.
I've been thinking this whole time like an MBK.
Yeah. It was so bad,
and I mean, initially too, there were parts of me that's like, is it a bull snake? Like, is it a baby? Like, it looked terrible.
Yeah, it was horrible, and you know, unfortunately, it didn't make it. We did a lot of preventative care for 4 or 5 months.
It took we worked on it for a long time,
and but it just came in. It was so constricted; it had like warped parts of its body. Where the shed had been constricting it for so long that it hadn't been able to grow and stuff. Yeah,
it was bad.
It was crazy, really, you know. And so I get that, and that's how we kind of stumbled across that. It was given to a local rescue, and they're like, "We don't know what to do with this thing." And I said I'd come get it, and we went and opened the box. And we're like, "Holy crap!" I called Lauren, was like, "I need in today." Like, there is no.
It's bad. It was bad.
It was bad, but you know, that just goes back to people don't care until it gets so bad, and then they give it away to a rescue because they don't know what to do with it. And you know,
what I want to do is I want to educate you. I want you to feel empowered to own these sorts of things within reason. You know, but I want you to feel empowered to do that and have the information. There's nothing I hate more than when I get a person who I know has good intentions and we're backpedaling because we did this backwards. Like, you should have come see me from the very beginning. Now we're seeing each other at the end. But then also, nothing makes me happier when they come back in with their new reptile and they're in a much better headspace about it and feel more empowered to do that. So, you know, that I want you to succeed. Like, that's why I'm here. But it's very challenging because I think there are some roadblocks in the way in the industry that just make it hard.
For sure.
I 100% agree with that. That sucks when you're as invested as you guys are. Yeah.
Because I want you to be successful, and I want what's best for the animal and do no harm and all of that. But it's interesting.
There's a good question.
Oh, let's see. What to do if all the exotic vets in your state aren't taking it? That's tough. So there is an industry-wide shortage. There's many reasons for that. The veterinary profession has the highest suicide rate. I know personally 3 veterinarians that have committed suicide. So it's very prevalent and it's there. I think a lot of it is in how we and our support staff and that are treated. I think that's part of it. The debt to income ratio is a real thing. Vet school is very expensive, and we come out making significantly less than our human medicine counterparts. And so that, I think, is a challenge. I think there are people who are scared to get into the exotic field too. I think that's part of it, and I think that's reasonable. It's different. I think a lot of people get nervous because there's so much undiscovered territory, and that's either very empowering or very frightening as a professional, and I find it very empowering. I like trying new stuff and working off label and doing a lot of things like that. But I think that is very stressful for a lot of people. I also think, the career is very female dominant, and having a family in this career, I think is doable, but not everyone does. And everyone's lifestyle is different. So that part makes it very hard, I think. And I think exotic vets, it is a specialty, but it doesn't really get recognized as such unless you get board certified, which is not always how it works because it's just not reasonable financially to either go through with that, or you don't have the right mentorship program set up, or people in your area aren't like set up to get someone to that level of board certification. I would just keep calling people. I would stress, the importance that you want to get in as an established client. But it's hard because that's very individual practice based. Like, we're accepting new clients all the time, but there are many practices in the area that aren't. And so it's very challenging, I think, to get through that right now. And it's a struggling point for all of us because we're having a hard time finding support staff and fitting everyone in. I mean, for surgeries alone, because I'm the only one at the practice that does exotic surgeries, I'm booked out months in advance. Every Thursday, I do anywhere from 8 to 12 procedures, and that doesn't include the emergencies that we try to fit in because we just have to. So, yeah, it's hard. And I wish I had an answer because it would make my life easier if I could find another one to help me out too. So,
yes, I think
tough.
What you mentioned earlier makes a big difference. The average reptile keeper is not bringing their reptile to the vet, so the demand seems so low. I'm sure, like compared to how many people actually keep reptiles versus how many reptiles go in for an annual exam or truly go in is so low. That the exotic side of things has to seem like even less rewarding in a monetary value,
100%.
Than your daily practice of dogs, cats.
I mean, I think that's totally it. Like, I see a lot more appointments than some of my partners in the practice, and it's not because they're not doing a good job. It's because they're seeing dogs and cats, and so it's different. Like, in dogs and cats, you have annual vaccines and annual prevention and all this other stuff that's very different than what I'm doing, which is a lot more husbandry consultations, illnesses that need, biopsies, tracheal washes, a lot of stuff that's just, it's different. And the cost of it's different too. And so I think that's where I run into roadblocks a lot too. Like, I want to do more for my clients, but then I'll say, well, I need to do blood work to give you a good diagnosis. The blood work is going to be anywhere from 125 to 225, depending on what I want to do. And I'll get like a full stop. Like, okay, we're good. Okay, well, now I'm basically MacGyvering a diagnosis for you and treating symptoms. And a lot of times it can work because I've been doing this a long time and I'm good at my job and I have ideas based on symptoms. But the other half of it is, if you're not going to invest a little bit in it either, then I'm going to only be able to give you vague answers because I can't predict the future and I can't, read minds and figure that out, but I can give you an assumption.
And I'm sure that gives you retaliation
sometimes
when things go wrong, right? Because they're like, we did this and we did, or, it's not getting better. So we do blood work. And then you're like, oh, it's this, and then like, oh, so we didn't even need to do that. And you're like, well, I would have known that if you would have let me do the blood work when we came in, And so I'm sure that's part of it. And kind of like you were saying earlier about the uncharted territory of exotics, as far as information that you guys have, you find it empowering. Some people find it fearful. I'm sure living in a Sue happy society, there's a lot of fear that goes into that.
There is.
I don't know what this is. This is something brand new. Here's what we're going to try. Oh, it didn't work out or ended up being this or whatever. And having people come back and be like, I can't believe you did, this or that or whatever.
And I will say, like, the clients I have are excellent. Like, it's pretty rare that I get too much pushback for trying something new. But I mean, you know me. The person you're talking to right now is the exact same person that would be talking to you in the Zoom room. Like, this is not just I'm casually talking to friends. This is just me in general. And if I tell you, like, hey, I've never done this before, but I will try it and we will see if it works. Most people are pretty cool with that as long as you're forthright with it from the beginning. It's just a matter of, what to do. And if people are okay with that, and if they accept the fact that, like, hey, we're trying something that's never been documented before, so let's see how it goes. And I love that, but it is scary for some people and some vets. So I get that part of it for sure.
All right, this is Dave Robotic Garage.
Okay, I have a female with what seems to be a petrified egg stuck inside her. It's not budging, and she hasn't eaten in a year. A snake. I was gonna ask. I was like, a female what?
A ball python. A ball python, I assume. And this is the same gentleman that said that there are no vets in his area taking new patients. So the first thing I would do is try to get her in where you can to get an X-ray to confirm that. If there is a petrified egg, then on X-ray, a lot of times what we'll see is layers upon layers of outer shell, or we'll see outer shell and then air spaces in the middle because the yolk is starting to dissolve and there's like bacteria in the egg that's kind of feeding in there and creating its own environment. And so if that's the case, then what we can do, sometimes I've gotten lucky with just giving some sedation, and once they relax, depending on how adhered it is into the reproductive tract, I've actually been able to like massage out stuck eggs. So that's an option. Ultrasound, you could potentially see it if they feel confident in what they're looking for. You should be able to still see the outer membrane of the egg on ultrasound. Blood work would be a good idea too, just to make sure she's not like particularly anemic. She doesn't have a really high white count or signs of systemic infection, because you'd want to get her on antibiotics. If the egg's stuck, it could be too big. It could be that the calcium ratio systemically is off for some reason, and that could create problems like making the egg too soft or too large to pass. There's lots of scenarios. I would almost recommend for that day, if you have an emergency vet in your area, just calling and seeing if they would just take an X-ray, even if they didn't really know what they were looking at. But an emergency vet should be able to push you to those vets, even if they're not taking new clients, at least to get like an emergency surgery done, even for that kind of situation. I would hope, again, like you said, it's area to area. But hopefully if you have an emergency vet going, okay, hey, this needs to be seen, it needs to have surgery, they'll at least fit it in on a surgery schedule. So
hopefully. And I will say, like, it's hard because not all emergency centers will see exotics either. We run into that in this area a lot. I actually get calls from the emergency center because I know the doc's there, and they're like, hey, can we, walk? Because a lot of them will be willing to say, I'm going to call someone that I know that sees exotics. And, it's a small community. We all know a lot of people. And it's can be possible to work through that way. The other would be if there's a vet school, like, within a couple hours. A lot of them have exotics departments. I would call them. They could potentially get you in on emergency. Try it that way.
I will say too, I've been to Champaign-Urbana for horse stuff, and I've also been up to
Did you go to Madison?
Yeah, I've been to Madison there too. It's amazing how much less expensive it is to go to a university. And I know
you think it would be.
Yes, and you think it would be. And I know part of that, or at least in my opinion, because they asked me when I get there, is like, are you okay if students work on this case, right? They're not going to be the only ones doing it. They're still a vet overseeing what's going on and everything. But if I've done it. I had a horse that I bought and then had colic like the next day. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't care. And because of that, they like gave me a bunch of discounts on stuff because it was a learning experience for the students as well.
100%.
So definitely don't be afraid to go to a university.
Yes.
They are not usually, at least the ones in my experience, they're not like insanely expensive. If anything, they're a little bit cheaper than your normal. But again, if you have students or what they're working on, it might be a little bit of different level of care too. So, just lots of factors to consider in, but definitely when I took him down there, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be insane. And
it's not typically as bad as you think. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
When I was stationed at Fort Bragg, I would let the students at NC State come check out everything. I'd be like, yeah, you can come check out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And if you can create that sort of relationship, it's great. Like I know I come to a lot of your guys' places locally because I'd rather just come than have you bring them all to me and make
100,
that work.
200 animals.
I mean, Kathy used to take me with her when I was young grasshopper veterinarian. I mean, that's the way people are going to learn. We have a local bird rescue that there's a vet who's starting to get more comfortable seeing birds, and she goes there to work with him. And then the stuff she doesn't feel comfortable, he brings to me, and that helps me out a ton because she's doing a lot of baseline. So there's things you can do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you can do the common stuff, it's definitely helpful
for sure.
All right, so how does scale rot and mouth rot occur? Like, what is the actual process of that, and how do you prevent it?
Sure.
In cases.
So a lot of it, again, goes back to husbandry. I would say there's multiple factors. In the environment, if it's not clean, if it's too moist, there's a lot of bacteria that can appear really easily. If the diet isn't right, that's another thing. So we'll go mouth rot first because I would say that is a little bit different than scale rot.
Okay.
Because I see scale rot more in the snakes and mouth rot more in the lizard kids. So mouth rot, a lot of times I will contribute to older lizards with periodontal disease, which people don't think about that, but there are dental recommendations for some of these lizards with, dental pads and actual teeth and all that. So bearded dragons have terrible dental disease when they're older.
Really?
And absolutely can. And so their dental arcade sometimes needs work when they're older, whether that be cracking off plaque and tartar under anesthesia or a dental cleaning or whatever. That's actually a thing. It's real life. There are typically like environmental abnormalities that predispose them to it. Again, a lot of times the environment's too humid for a more arid animal. I'll see that a lot. Or the substrate isn't cleaned regularly. You definitely don't have to clean the substrate all the time. And especially if you're doing more of like a bioactive setup, I don't recommend that at all.
I was just about to ask.
Yeah. But if you're not bioactive, like if you have a bearded dragon in like a 60 long or whatever, I mean, you should probably do deep clean in that once a month. And spot clean it, I would say at least weekly, depending on how often they defecate and all of that, because that's where they'll get the bacteria, or they're eating in places that they shouldn't be. Like a lot of reptiles, it makes sense to feed them in a different place, especially if they're going after bugs or smaller prey items, to feed them in a place that's not their habitat, because while they're not domesticated, they also were never in the wild. So they don't understand that like they're diving for things and getting a mouthful of sand sometimes. And then that's getting stuck in the arcade. That's causing your local infection. Retained shed around the mouth is another huge cause of stomatitis and mouth rot. Again, that's related to husbandry. Your parameters aren't right. That's going to happen. I would say the scale rot I see more often. Again, too damp of an environment, inappropriate heating elements. So they'll get some sort of thermal injury, and then they'll get scale rot secondary to that. Again, diet. UV is another one too. I don't care if it lives in a cave its entire life. That doesn't mean it's never seen the sun. So as my lights go out, see?
Yeah, right. Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. So that's part of it too, I think, is it all goes back to husbandry. It just really does. If you're not having it set up in an appropriate environment, there are going to be systemic consequences in that animal. And I think that that's across the board probably my number one differential on most things that come in. Husbandry, traumatic injury, retained shed, which goes back to husbandry. I mean, a lot of that. Yep.
As far as traumatic injury, that's usually like something environmental, right?
It can be. So it can either be they unintentionally did it to themselves, because I've seen that where they've like gone after a prey item and like got themselves. Yes. Or they're housed with other conspecifics that like go after each other. I've seen that. You know, I have a love-hate relationship with feeding live. I've seen a lot of screwed up stuff from feeding live.
Yep.
But I also understand why people feed live. So I'll never pick a side of that argument, because I get both. I would prefer if everyone would feed frozen. Personally, it would be better, but I also know that there would be like 80,000 ball pythons that would just die instantly.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if everything would eat frozen, right? It would be great. Yeah,
100% agree.
Yeah,
yes, or they'll just starve themselves out of spite. That's really what'll happen. You know, so I mean, anything like that can happen. I think people get a little complacent with like the heating pad elements, that they're either not covering them with the right substrate, or like the contact with the animals too much. Never buy a heat rock. I don't care what anyone says. I think they're the dumbest freaking things that ever existed, because I see so many injuries from that too. And then the other thing that people don't realize is the bulb to tank height distance, because you can get thermal injury if your bulb is too close to the top too, and too close to their basking spot. So yeah.
That's a good question.
So let's say a snake takes a bite from a rat. Any basic spot
Sure.
treatment?
So I do think it's a good idea if you're feeding live to have a wound kit, and I talk about this a lot in my appointments. So basically, you can get over the counter without seeing me or another vet. You can get chlorhexidine solution, or vetrimycin is like what it's labeled under a lot. Saline or contact solution is another good one to have on hand. And then betadine. I kind of have people gather those, some 4x4 gauze, some cotton swabs, and then some cotton balls, even a washcloth, and then Dawn dish soap, which is completely underrated. You know, and I tend to, though, everyone's go-to is, I'll clean the blood off with peroxide. Don't do that. Peroxide is actually caustic and delays tissue healing. So don't do that unless you're cleaning a stain off of something. Don't actually put it on the wound. What I tend to do is get those antiseptic solutions, and you can pick any of them, whatever's available. The simple adage in my mind is the solution to pollution is dilution. So you have to get all the bacteria off of there by some sort of antiseptic liquid. So whatever you choose. The betadine, it doesn't take much. Like if you're going to do it, mix it with water, make it the concentration of like weak iced tea is what it's supposed to look like. And then you can use that to clean the wound. And then you can put Neosporin or SSD, silver sulfadiazidine.
That's what I have.
Yep. You know, either of those, you can put a thin layer over, even if you just want something to cover it. Even a thin layer of like Vaseline or petroleum jelly is fine, because that will still keep those tissues moist until you can get to a vet, because that's going to help the vet save the tissue if they can.
Oh, that's good. I also keep it's dry, like it's powder, and then I have the sterile syringe of water to mix it. What's it called? Cephalosporin or something like that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I have that, but I have to call my buddy because I've never taken dose calc. So
Sure.
I don't know how to dose calc it. So,
Yep.
But I can draw and I can freeze.
Yep.
There's people in this chat right now that I've sent syringes of that to frozen overnight.
Yep. And technically it is a prescription medication.
I know.
Before test. So
I had to really work to get it.
Yep. So you just need to be careful, because that they are going to start cracking down on that more and more with multi-resistant drug therapy sort of things.
Yes.
But it is a good one. I use that one a lot. I like that one, and you can make it different concentrations, because if I'm treating the little guys, I can put it at like 100 mg per mil dose. But if I'm treating the big guys, I can change the concentration to a much higher mg per mil, so you're not giving as much of a volume. And so it's a really versatile drug. So that part's nice.
Yeah, I absolutely Love it. I keep that. I keep the 2%. How do you say it? Silver
sulfadiazidine, SSD. Just call it SSD. It's not
SSD, yeah.
It's not
no, and the Army SSD is torture. Structured self-development courses. God, that's 12 hours of sitting on a computer screen while people yell at you.
Yeah, well.
SSD, I think that's funny. You think silver, whatever. You think torture, and I think solid state drive for a computer.
No, but yeah,
I
keep that because it's like a lotion, it's not an oil based or petroleum.
Yes.
It's closer to like a lotion.
And I will say, if you're using that, it is a glaze, not a frosting.
Correct.
Like your snake does not need to come in looking like a cupcake. It's a little bit. A little bit. It doesn't need a lot. Yep.
Yeah. I got one who took a bite in the mouth and her lower right jaw is swollen. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly why I have that antibiotic. Keep it sterile. She'll be fine in 3 months.
All right. So this is the question I'm sure you get asked a lot, but there's so much debate about this. Stuck shed. To pull or not to pull?
Oh. Well, so for me, it depends on where it is.
Yes.
I would say this. God, I hate this question.
I knew you would. That's why I didn't tell you.
I hate it so much. So I think it depends on where it is. And in my mind, if the body is ready to get rid of it, it will. And so if you put light pressure with a damp paper towel or washcloth on something and it starts to peel, then go for it.
Yep.
If you have to get to a point where you're taking tweezers,
you're holding the animal and holding it like pulling,
and you're trying to pull this, don't do that. Like you're going to create damage and problems way down the road. I've learned the hard way on a couple retained spectacles that and I tried the double-sided tape trick. I had them come in multiple times. I soaked it. I flushed it. I topical ointment it. Everything. And one of them I finally just sedated and surgically trimmed off just to get some relief because there was infection in between. It still caused damage to the cornea.
Yeah.
It still did, even doing it in that careful of a manner. Mm-hmm. So I think if it wants to come off, it's going to come off. If you're working at this thing for 20 minutes to try to get it off, it's not ready. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. You may have to wait 2 to 10 shedding cycles for it to come all the way off, especially in the ball pythons and retained spectacles. It's just the worst.
Thank you for pulling them spectacles.
You're welcome.
Yes.
You're welcome. Doctor. I went to school for a long time to learn.
I love that you speak in proper nomenclature. Yes. I love it.
Yeah.
I knew you and Brandon would get along really well. I was like, Brandon, she's legit. I'm telling you.
It's because I'm a military wife. That's why.
Oh yeah, that is absolutely why. Yeah. Okay, dude. we gotta hang out when I come up there next time.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I would say if it's ready to go, then go for it. But if it's anything around the eyes or face, toes are another one. Everyone gets real sad when a toenail or the very end of a digit comes off with a shed. Sometimes it's just not preventable. Sometimes it's because we get a little overzealous and it's not ready. But I'm the biggest picker of them all. If there's shed coming off, I'm getting it off. But if it's not ready, it's not going to go. So just be patient. I know that's hard. We're in a very instant gratification world, but be patient. It will come off eventually.
How much gratification do you get by lancing and squeezing an abscess?
Oh my God, my favorite thing. I love pus. Oh, it's the best.
Isn't it crazy?
It's the best. And they don't make, human level pus. They make scrambled egg, cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, thick stuff. So I'm sorry for whoever's food I'm ruining for life, but it's so satisfying. Mm-hmm.
For sure. I'm pretty sure, Dr. Lauren, you have told me before that pulling shed is therapeutic.
Oh, 100%.
If you ever have anything at home that has, she's call me. I will come over and just sit there and I'll just gently remove suck shed. And I get it because I'm the same way. It's so gratifying.
Absolutely.
And I think everyone, even in proper husbandry, right, has had the time where they open their tub and their snake is in the middle of a shed and you just literally hold the shed and the snake just slithers out of it. You're just this is
so satisfying. Yes, absolutely.
I like to do it with the flashlight above, so my snake goes from this weird like
Gross.
that to like this rainbow iridescence.
Yeah.
Pimple popper, like on humans are gross. Like
we're foul.
I don't like people.
Ugly.
People are nasty.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why if I went into medicine, I would go into your kind of medicine, because I don't even look like how we talked about earlier when we first came on. We lost a lot of monitor species.
Mm-hmm.
We've lost a lot of snake species in the past 20 years. The most invasive species on Earth is a human being.
100%.
We need to depopulate.
100%.
There need people doctors.
Yeah.
Exotic animal doctors.
You know who probably has it worse though is the dentists. Like they're freaking saints because mouths are nasty.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine.
I could not
imagine.
You know, and oh God, I just
Yeah.
There's just
could not imagine. Anyway, I'm sure this is what we've touched on a couple times, and I'm sure you see a lot of it, but metabolic bone disease.
Yes.
What is it, and how do we prevent it?
Sure. Okay. So this is going to be a soapbox. So metabolic bone disease is secondary nutritional, oh my gosh, hyperparathyroidism. I was like going to lose it there for a minute.
There you go.
Yes. So that's what it technically is. So it's an endocrine disorder that's created from a misbalancing of calcium and phosphorus, which is directly related to the animal's ability to synthesize vitamin D.
Love this. I love it.
There's your definition, okay?
Yes.
Freaking mouthful. Basically what happens is the animal is being provided a calcium phosphorus imbalance in some way. And everyone wants it to be gout, but very rarely is it actually gout.
Yes.
More often than not, it is something in their husbandry that is screwed up. It's either they're not provided enough calcium, they're provided the wrong kind, they're not provided it often enough. They're provided
different kinds of calcium for different species.
I know. They're provided it, but they don't eat it. Yeah. They're at different developmental stages of their life. Or lo and behold, they aren't given any option to have UV. UV lighting is necessary for the body to convert the calcium and phosphorus to the things it needs to convert it to, because it has to bind to vitamin D to be processed nutritionally. So if your animal doesn't have UV, you might as well just stop feeding it, because it's not going to get anything out of there that it needs. And that is very challenging, especially in the young developing animals, or the animals that aren't fed like whole prey items. So the animals that are more like omnivorous, insectivore, salad sort of kids, because if they're fed the wrong things, it either doesn't have a high enough nutritional value of calcium, or they aren't getting enough in the supplementation that they need. And it's exceptionally hard to get an animal's calcium level too high. I will say that. I think it's very challenging to get their calcium level too high. It's very easy to keep it very low. And so the signs are very nonspecific. I've seen things so extreme as like jaw fractures, fractured long hard bones of the body like the femur or the humerus. I've seen spinal fractures. I've seen rib fractures. I've seen bones that don't look like they have any calcium in it. It looks like ghosting on a film because they've pulled all the calcium out of their bones to try to get their metabolic functions going. I've seen respiratory illnesses. I've seen regurgitation. I've seen jaundice. I've seen all sorts of things. And it's all really nonspecific. And the kicker of it all is if it's caught too late, there's not a lot I can do. Yep. And it becomes like a hospice care sort of situation. If it's caught early, a lot of times just changing the husbandry and the nutritional intake and diet of that animal can be life-saving for it. So, and there are some that I've managed for years. There are some that even have really severe cases that, we seem to be tolerant of pain relief and seem to be tolerant of their long-term calcium supplementation and are doing okay. But and I own a metabolic bone crested gecko that he gets around fine, but I am very cognizant of what he gets nutritionally. And so I think that that's challenging, because I think nutrition is a very rapidly developing area of husbandry. I think that there's a lack of people looking at the natural histories of the animal and how they should be fed. And I think that that comes into play quite a bit. Like, when your bearded dragon turns a year to 18 months, it should be eating vegetables more than bugs.
Yes.
It should be. And if it's not, that's when I see a lot of these problems come up too, because it's too protein rich. So, there's a lot of that's just not, I think, common knowledge. And I think that that's where a lot of it comes into play too. Everyone wants it to be genetic too. Sometimes I think it is. I think that's possible.
Right.
But a lot of times it's probably because it was from an overbred pair that had crappy husbandry to start, and then they just came out that way. I mean, that's really more what it is that the husbandry from wherever they got it from is not up to par. And I know it sounds like I'm saying the same thing over and over, but like, you have to have the right environment for these animals, or you're setting yourself up to fail. It's just not going to work. Like, when I talk to people all the time, I think you need to get all your stuff for the lizard before you get the lizard.
Yes.
Make sure it works. Make sure you can get your humidity to stay where you want it to stay. Make sure you can get the substrate to do what it wants to do. If you want to do a bioactive tank, I think that's awesome. I think it's way better for the animal, but your bioactive tank should be set up and ready to go for like months before you even bring the animal in there.
Yep.
So,
unless you want to be replacing what makes it bioactive, and it's just expensive as hell. Yep.
Clean up crew, all that shit.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. I think that in the dog and cat industry, there's so much of like a kibble or pellet based diet that it's much more commonplace to have those things in as base ingredients. I think, the new sexy thing in dog and cat land is raw diet. And we get a lot of crap that's screwed up because like the cat diet doesn't have enough taurine in it. Well, people didn't even know they needed taurine. Well, taurine's just incorporated because now it's so processed.
Staple. It's like a staple item.
It's a staple thing. So I think in the reptile industry, we're on the opposite end of that because there aren't as many base diets for these animals that are common knowledge. And it's just processed for them in a little bit of a different way because they're so produce and live prey heavy that it's just different. I think it's a great idea. And I think there are more and more products on the market all the time for gut loading your insects and for topical administration on your salads for your omnivorous or vegetarian type kids. But I think because a lot of them are that just more natural diet based, that's where it's lacking. So I think that's part of the problem. And I think nutrition across the board in the United States is crap, even for people. I mean, there's not a lot that my doctor talks to me about, like what calcium rich vegetables and so talk to your veterinarian about good foods and which ones are better from a calcium intake standpoint. There are some that definitely are, even if they're strict vegetarian lizards. There's also tons of products on the market that are actually really good for gut loading your bugs. And, if they won't eat them with dusting over the top, there's tons of stuff you can feed your bugs that actually has got all that nutrients in it, that won't be necessarily like food aversion situations for those animals either. So, I think eventually we will get to that. I just don't think the industry is caught up to that yet. I think that's where we're at.
I think a lot of things with diet and nutrition in general, which I think it's funny that now people are going to more raw diet because I think we see it more of the opposite. And like your exotic animal side is convenience.
Yes.
Convenience of scooping up some dry food, throwing it in the bowl, putting it in the cage and leaving it there,
Yes.
For years, cat food was the staple diet for sugar gliders for years and years when they got imported. And now we find out that they're really not that carnivorous at all. To be completely honest, they're more insectivores.
They're more insectivore for sure.
Yeah. And even, omnivorous in that fact. Like,
and the hedgehogs too. I mean, how many hedgehogs were raised on straight straight high protein kitten food, when in reality, they need an insectivore based diet. Now, there are some really good exotic nutrition companies that are super communicative and really open to things.
Yes.
Missouri is one of my favorites.
Yes.
And they're awesome. Like if you go on their website, they're great. They
not sponsored.
No,
yeah, not sponsored. Yeah.
It's not, no, but I love them. And they're super customer friendly. And if you talk to them about things, like they've got a bearded dragon diet that's pelleted.
Yep.
And it's decent, you know.
So we went down.
Yep, they have a hedgehog diet. They've got stuff for skunks.
Yeah. We went down to St. Augustine Alligator Farm in Florida, and they feed Missouri to the gators there, you know. Yeah. So
they've got a lot of good stuff.
For sure.
So this is something that I've always thought about that I'd love to ask you, right? I have a hedgehog, and I feed her not straight pellets. I have wet cat food. I give it to my skink dusted with Bluey Buffet.
Sure.
From Rapashi.
Sure.
Fantastic, right? So I do the same thing. I grind up those because it's an insect-based pellet diet. So I grind it up and then I dust. I give wet cat food to the cat, but I drain the gravy.
Sure.
The hedgehog won't eat, like just the pellets, and I get her to eat. I drain the gravy and then I sprinkle the crushed up insectivore pellets.
Sure.
But here's my big question, right? Do you think, in your opinion, because just if you give even humans, you give anything something to eat, something nutritious, right? Their body has to be able to, like you were talking about the UV, absorb and process and use that, right?
Correct.
So, in your professional opinion, do you think a more naturalistic diet per species is better because that species has particular digestive enzymes in their gut for that nutrition?
Sure.
Or, yeah, you do think that?
I think more natural is better. I mean, that's the theory behind like the one of the I call it a diet, but it's really not. One of the diets that makes the most sense to me in the human world is like Whole30, where you're talking about like real unprocessed foods, right? And the benefits of those sorts of things. Anything that's less synthetic, I think, is always better. Now, from a dog and cat standpoint, I think it is exceptionally challenging to meet the nutritional needs of an animal like that in the lifestyle that most people live. I think that's very hard. And I think it's very hard to do a raw diet right. And that's why there are probably less nutritional based problems in the dog and cat industry than in an exotic pet industry, because we're doing the natural nutrition and it's not easy.
No, it's very time consuming.
Very time consuming. The biggest example I ever have is the lorikeets in captivity, the rainbow and the Swainsons and the green napes and whatever. There's tons of zoos and institutions that have these guys for nectar feeding because they're more a nectivorous, fruitivore, sort of animal that feeds on nectars and pollens and fruit juices and those sorts of things. And so we made this synthetic powder that you mix with water that you feed them in captivity for the nectar. And across the board, these guys are getting hepatic lipidosis, which is fatty liver disease. And there's something in this that's causing problems, and here's the bottom line, right? It's not a domesticated animal. We are never going to be able to accurately recreate the diet scenario it would have in the wild, buzzing around from flower to flower and fruit juice. And, we're just not going to do that unless we can literally track them, in their native habitat and get their natural history and figure out exactly what flowers they're eating and how to get the nectar out of there. And, unless you can set up that exact environment.
And then you have to source it.
Yeah.
Like even if you figure it out, then you have to grow enough flowers and enough places to collect. And
100%, so that I think that's part of the problem is that we're trying to recreate a natural diet out of stuff that isn't always natural or native to that animal in the area, but we have to find a nutritional profile that's similar. And to be honest, we don't always know what that is, so that I think that's the challenge. Whereas dog and cat, it just goes back to they've been domesticated a while, for so long that we have figured out a way that makes sense. We're just behind. That's all it is.
Yep. Oh, I know. And I think another big part of it too, is I feel like there's so many people that only categorize by carnivorous, omnivores or vegetarians, right? Like they only eat. It's like you said, there's sugar gliders, there's nectars, fruitivores. There's so much more that goes into it. I think it's crazy for people to think that, oh, they only eat meat or vegetables or they eat both.
Yeah.
It's like, there's so many more food groups available, you know.
Absolutely.
That it's crazy. We have a tortoise that was fed raw chicken for 12 years. Like, that's the only thing she ate, you know? Yeah. She's like, we figured out the other day, she's got to be like 35, 36 years old because of how long these people had her. So these things are hardy, right? You know? But in the month that we've had her, she went from being a completely brown turtle, so now she's got red and yellow and orange and like all these colors to her. Her beak was this long. Oh, we've trimmed that up, but it's crazy to see the color transformation when you provide a healthy diet.
It's amazing
that come with these animals.
It's amazing, and it's just it's hard because I think a lot of these situations too are like very good intention. You know, I think most people are trying to do the right thing. They just don't know what the right thing is.
Right.
And the other thing I think that's completely underrated in these less domesticated areas, especially for the ones that have more of a fibrous vegetative diet, is browse, like natural leafy browse and barks and those sorts of things. You know, the gums that are in the middle of
100%
twigs and things. You know, that stuff that's important in their diet that we may not even understand. And so, you know, we don't know what they eat and when, and like who's paying a guy to sit and watch, you know, these guys out in the wild. I mean, that's just not. It's not an area that is always super funded. So I think it's going to be constantly evolving, and we're going to see changes to it. I mean, things that I've recommended in the beginning have changed, and I've been doing this for 8 years, you know, and that it's just it's an evolving science for sure.
Definitely. So we've touched on it a few times tonight, so I'm going to give you full reins on this. UVB and UVA, what are your thoughts on it? Why is it important? And what reptiles need it and which don't, if any, right? Like if there's any that don't actually need it.
So this is like a high debate, and it depends on either which reptile purist you're talking about, or how long they've been in the industry, or what species they're keeping on the need for UV. Example, there are many snake keepers that don't think they need UV because they get whole prey and they should be able to process their calcium that way. Cool. Sure. I disagree. I think across the board, the benefits of UVA and UVB are huge, whether they be whole prey eating, strictly nocturnal, you know, and I get the arguments and I get the logic on both sides. I think the health benefits I've seen from adding in beneficial lighting have been huge, not only in reptiles, but in other species. We actually have UV lighting on a lot of our birds at the zoo who are in lighting situations on a regular basis, but may not have, like, it may be indirect lighting as opposed to direct lighting that they get. I feel like that makes a huge difference in those guys and their feather quality and those sorts of things. I think in the reptiles, I see big differences in their scale quality, in their weights, in their appetite consistencies, because even if they're not exposed to UV on a regular basis, or if they don't need it to process things nutritionally, it still affects like their circadian rhythm and their natural clock and those sorts of things. It affects hormone regulation. It affects a lot. And this is also a science that we don't understand. I mean, we just don't. But I think the benefits are huge. I really feel like my ones that I've got on UV across the board look better, are more consistent in their behaviors. Now, whether that is just luck and I'm just seeing that, I don't know. But the snakes I've got on it, you know, I had a lot of leopard gecko keepers that were like, no, they're a cave dwelling animal. They don't need UV. Okay, well, they see sunlight at some point. So you need to provide it still. Again, I've got a lot of snake people that don't feel like UV is necessary. And while it may not necessarily be that way from them to process things nutritionally, it really does from an environmental regulation standpoint. It's an important part. Like, how many snakes do you see sitting out in the sunlight basking for thermal regulation? They're not just out there because it's warm. You've got to be getting some benefits from that UV too.
Yeah, 100%.
And things we don't understand what they're getting, but there has to be some sort of benefit from the UV aspect. Otherwise, they just come out at night and sit on a hot rock. I mean, there's aspects of that I think are so still under development and figuring out the science of why that works. But I think it's super important. Even with us, think about us as humans, seasonal depression rates, hormone regulation, different climate areas and how UV affects how you live, working in an office versus working outdoors and how that affects your metabolism. There is something there. We just may not know exactly what it is yet. But I think it's important. I think I recommend it to all my lizard owners, regardless of the species, regardless of nocturnal versus diurnal, regardless of cave dwelling or desert, like you're getting a UV recommendation for sure.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'm going to give my secret away. I learned pretty much everything on Google Scholar, reading papers from other doctors and stuff. No one ever talks about Google Scholar, but I use it. So
it's underrated. It's a good resource.
Yeah. So every, because I have a blue tongue skink that doesn't need, it doesn't need it. Every blue tongue skink breeder I know breeds them in racks, sort of like this, but like more like rodent racks. But I provide it, and my skink does great. And after reading a lot of studies done by people at the University of Florida and Texas A&M and stuff like that. They talk about the scale quality. They talk about scale and bone density. Which is crazy because scale's like armor. For these animals.
100%.
And so even with the nocturnal animals, I agree. Every study has shown that even if there's nocturnal, every species in the world benefits from sunlight.
Well, and there has to be, think about where these animals live. Yes, they can be cave dwelling. Yes, they can be under rocks. Yes, all that. There's got to be some sort of indirect UV exposure to them at some point. Unless they're living off of planet Earth or in some area of the Arctic Circle where they'd never survive, that never see sun, it's just not possible for an animal not to be exposed to it at some point in the wild. So the benefits of it are definitely there. It's just we can't say concretely what they are because we don't know. We don't know enough about it yet.
I can't remember what it's called, but the animals do that thing where they'll hide under a rock and leave their tail out during the day to get UV like that. But I can't remember what that's called.
I can't either. I know exactly what you're talking about.
So that being said, because I agree with you with the UVB and indirect light, right? Do you think, for us to keep our animals in rack systems, ball pythons are mainly nocturnal or ground dwelling, right? They don't come out and bask in the heat. They absorb all their heat through their belly. So obviously in a system like this, where UVB maybe isn't necessarily considered necessary, but would definitely have its benefits, right? Instead of having to add a UVB light to each tub, do you think just having an overall UVB in the room for indirect,
I think that's good,
would be beneficial?
I do. So what we'll do at the zoo for some animals that
my girlfriend right now,
what we'll do for the zoo at some animals that it's not realistic to get a UV in their specific enclosure because of setup or whatever. We have different UVB lights on stands that will rotate around exhibits that give exposure. So it's on a different sort of schedule. And I do think it makes a difference, even if it's not, I'm not asking
if they're not basking directly underneath the light, but just
I'm not asking every rack purist to abolish that. No, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If they're doing fine, they're probably fine. But I think that it would be interesting if there came a study where, because there are, to a point, how far away your lamp should be from the basking area. Or, you can do that with the racks indirectly. Depending on how your rooms are set up, you could find a location that makes sense for that to be, and it could work to give indirect benefits. I think that's very reasonable.
That's smart.
I think that would be a lot more.
I think it's a lot more realistic than
it would be a lot more invited into the hobby than you have to put a light in every tub or you have to.
I agree.
And I also think for ball pythons, that would almost be detrimental because they don't like a super bright light shining in there.
100%. But like, I mean, in either of your guys' rooms, like where your chairs are right now, if you had a way to do a freestanding UV light that you had on a timer for 12 hours a day and it just on and off, you know, I do think that's super beneficial.
Yeah,
I would definitely be looking into that. Because I have been trying to, you know, think of, because I agree with you that UVB, it's got to, you know, everything you put it on, you see benefits, you know, and so, but I also looking at from the animal standpoint and understand people also, they're like, yeah, but this is an animal that comes out and basks in the sun. So how do we replicate that without stressing out an animal and having to completely change the way that everyone does something? So yeah, I'll have to try it. Maybe we'll start something with that. We should come in, like evaluate everything, put UVB, and then like a year later come back and revisit it. I would love.
We can write a paper. I can publish.
How are we revolutionary?
Yes, there you go.
That's
But seriously, I would love to work something out because I think it would be good information for everyone, and that would be something very simple that every breeder can implement without having to complain about the cost effectiveness or completely changing up everything.
100%. I think it's super reasonable. I think you can find beneficial lighting and do it on a stand and do it in a way that makes sense. You know, I don't think everyone needs to. Like I said, I'm not anti-rack. I don't think racks work for everyone, but I am not anti-rack. But I do think the UV is super beneficial. I really do.
I'm not anti-rack. I'm not anti-tank. I'm not anti-PVC. We've always talked about. We talked about in this episode. If it works for you, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
That's
you know, I do try to tell people that are getting their first ball python, if you can go PVC with the window in the front and not go tank, it's beneficial just because it's a lot less work. A tank is a lot more work because of humidity and heat requirements, right?
100%.
But it's not impossible by any means. You just are going to be monitoring it more often. So
totally.
All right. So the next thing that we have is, what is the nidovirus? So what exactly is it, and what are the symptoms that keepers should watch for in looking for that in their collections?
So the nidovirus is, I think some people are calling it like the serpentis virus too, or whatever. I think you'll see that on some sites.
Okay,
I think you'll see that on some sites. It's pretty snake specific, mostly pythons. Boids are in there to a point. It's very similar to like a coronavirus sort of manifestation, where it gives very non-specific and varying respiratory-based symptoms, along with some inappetence, some failure to thrive sort of things. It's very challenging because I kind of view it like herpes in cats. Like if you tested a shelter and tested 100 cats, 99 of them would probably be positive for herpes virus. And probably 10 of them would be symptomatic. So I think that's the challenge, right? Is like, we're finding it afterwards when you've got symptomatic patients that are wheezing, bubbling, excessive saliva, bubbling from the nares, looking paler in the gums, railed breathing where you can like actually see the respirations much more prominently. And then we're seeing, it's nidovirus. Where in reality, we aren't testing any of the healthy ones, you know, and why would we? I mean, you know, you can for information's sake, but if they're not having symptoms, and the important thing is there's not a vaccine. There's no wonder cure. It's mostly symptomatic treatment and hospice care for the ones that get really sick. And so that involves antibiotics, sometimes nebulizing. I know I've done that on a few snakes that can be really effective. Sometimes we do tracheal washes and cultures, biopsying if there's anything that we feel is biopsy worthy, and pain relief and anti-inflammatory and husbandry changes and increasing temps and increasing humidity and just isolating from the rest of your collection and hoping for the best. I mean, it sucks, There's no predictor as to how you get it or when you get it. Like I said, I think the vast majority of snakes are already exposed to it, but there's also varying strains. So it's like the flu, like coronavirus, everyone responds to it differently. And so you get a new snake in your collection that's not symptomatic and it's near a snake. And now that snake, like that, this is the importance of quarantine to a point, right?
Yes.
Like you throw a new snake into your collection right away and all of a sudden the snake next to it is unhealthy. Well, the new snake probably brought in something that the established snake or lizard or whatever, depending on what we're talking about, hasn't been exposed to before and now has an illness. So the quarantine process is definitely important. I think it's a good idea if you're adding new snakes to your collection. If you're questionable about anything, take it to your vet, have them look at it. There is some testing we can do for different things, depending on what we're looking for. Intestinal parasites, which is another hot topic of, do you treat them? Do you treat them all across the board? Like, what do you do? You know, that's another hot topic of sorts. But I think that as long as you're using, that's a good question. I think they'll have antibodies to it, but if they get exposed to a different strain, they'll probably be symptomatic.
Me.
Yes, go.
Okay, so Tracy, there was an actual legitimate, oh my God, Cody Bartolini and Forrest Fanning, rest in peace, Forrest. He was probably the most knowledgeable herpetoculturist in our industry. He died a while back, but a couple of years ago. But those two went in. I'm not going to say the number they had invested in this collection, but it was close to 7 figures. And it was all arboreal snakes, and almost all of them ended up getting Nido, and that was where a lot of your Nido information came from, was that particular collection. So something that was tested was the egg clutches they had. So the shells had Nido. The inside of the box they were incubating in had Nido and everything. The babies did not.
That's fascinating. I just don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, I would expect at least some antibodies. I'm not saying positive, but I would expect antibodies.
Well, okay, so I don't know if they tested for antibodies.
Which they may not have. Because, you know,
they just weren't, they didn't come back positive. Right. Yeah. Interesting.
It's very interesting.
So
that's all I know about that. But yeah, that was
going on, like you said, right? If you test 100 cats for herpes, 99 of them are going to come back positive. Only 10 are going to be symptomatic. Right? So with that being said, would you recommend that people start testing for Nido? Like every time they bring in a new snake, so they test for Nido. And then if it comes back positive, is it like complete freak out meltdown?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, do I think it's bad to test? No. Do I think if they're symptomatic, it's a good idea to test? Yes. Yes, I do. I think you could spend a lot of money on testing and find out they're positive and it never become a problem. I do think that that's a reality, depending on the strain and the exposure level and all of that. I actually think the most important thing, if you're getting a new snake in a collection, it really is best to quarantine it for 60 to 90 days.
Yes.
And I know that sounds like a really long time.
Nope.
And the zookeeper that works in reptiles also hates when I tell him that too. Yep. But the reason being, if a virus is going to shed and become symptomatic and contagious and then resolve and become in a non-infective phase, 90 days most of the time will take care of it, on its own. Even if that animal has 0 symptoms the entire time, if they stress shed a mild amount of virus, you know, it's going to be contained within that 90-day period. That's your nidovirus, that's your inclusion body disease. Intestinal parasites can usually be resolved within a 90-day period. I mean, there's a lot of things. So that's my recommendation. And then on the same token, quarantine means like clean it last, touch it last, leave it alone, wash your hands. If the thing has mites, don't go touch anybody else because there's probably one on you somewhere.
I change my clothes and shower.
100%. You know, I mean, quarantine really does mean quarantine. Like, it doesn't mean like in the rack next door. Like another room is ideal,
Yes.
you know, because at least it's not a bird, you know, sharing the same airspace and all that other stuff that becomes way more of a problem, but in a different room and do them last and minimal handling and all of that. And it seems very counterintuitive because that's what you want to do. Like it's new and you want to touch it and you know, play with it and figure it all out, but don't do it.
Forget about it.
Yep,
forget about it,
yeah,
right?
Forget about it for a quarter of the year and then you will be good to go.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Basking, by the way, it's called cryptic basking.
Thank you.
I got the text message from my short female companion that said she was sad that no one knew what cryptic basking was. When you could have put it in the chat.
Yeah. So with Nido, why do you believe that there isn't a vaccine? Is it just that there literally isn't one, you know, that can be developed, or is it lack of like support and funding and wanting to find a virus, you know, a solution for it, or what, you know, what in your...
It's a combination of all the factors. So, I mean, across the board, the reptile industry is very lacking in vaccinations, right? I mean, we just are. A lot of it's funding. Like, why? What's the need? Where are we going to put the money? You know, I really think that's a lot of it is the demand and need ratio is just not prevalent compared to other things. It's not a zoonotic risk to people, so that puts it on a really low priority list. If it was something that was a zoonotic risk to people, then I think it would be a different story. Right. You know, I think we just have to find a group of people that's passionate enough and financially invested enough, and then the FDA has to care. But until that happens, it's just
there's a lot of factors. Yeah.
I mean, it is. It really is multifactorial, unfortunately. You know, and I mean, I'm not going to get on any sort of pro or anti-vaccine thing about human or otherwise. But, you know, there's a lot of reasons vaccines can be developed quickly in the human world, and it's because humans have been getting vaccines for a long time.
Yeah.
This would not be a quick process in the snake world, because we would just, or reptile world in general. Even the bird industry doesn't have a lot of vaccines. It's pretty low, and most of those are related to things that are production industry based as opposed to pet industry. So it's just different.
Sure. All right. Next question we have is, should breeders keep any medications in stock, prescription or not? And if so, which ones and why?
This is the most important question in this whole thing.
So if you're a breeder and you don't have a veterinarian, you need to get one.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's start there, because it's not a good idea to just, the regulations are becoming so much tighter on the exotic pet trade across the board in many states that you need a veterinarian in your corner. I have to inspect breeding facilities where I am if you're going to sell animals, and sign paperwork to that effect that
in Iowa, USDA stuff. Yep.
You know, I have to talk about how you guys are an active client of mine. Ironically enough, I had a pet store locally, had an inspection, and I hadn't been out there, and they never asked me to come out there, and they got tagged for that. You know, it's a real thing. So let's start there. Before we talk medications and stuff you can get without me, you need me first. So just know that. I think there's a list of things that you can get over the counter that's very reasonable. Some of them we already touched on. So, you know, gauze, cotton swabs, those round makeup pads work really nice for putting on topical medications. Chlorhexidine or vetrimycin, betadine, Dawn dish soap, saline contact solution. I think those are all great. Neosporin is fine. SSD, again, I feel like you have to have a prescription for that, but it depends on the place.
So I got mine through a prescription.
Yep. That one's typically prescription grade because it's a prescription grade medication that's actually used for treating burns in people quite a bit. So, you know, over the counter wise, I mean, to a point you're limited. Some forceps or tweezers, you know, those are good to have on hand. a set aside group of like dish rags and stuff or microfiber towels that you want to have.
Go check out her animal.
Sure, I'll come to Oregon anytime.
Yeah.
West Coast is very unexplored territory for me. I'll go over there anytime. Let's see. I lost my train of thought. Okay, prescription wise, Fortaz, ceftazidime, that's a great one. It's very broad spectrum. Let's see. Meloxicam's one that's used quite a bit for pain relief and inflammation. Ciprofloxacin, neopolybacitracin, ophthalmic drops for like retained spectacles and those sorts of things are very reasonable to have. Trimethoprim sulfa is another one. It's coccidiostat and a broad spectrum antibiotic. That's a nice one to have. Panicure and metronidazole are your broad spectrum dewormers that you can have. Those are all things through your veterinarian. So you definitely need to get an established vet to have those on board. A lot of times, if I know I have a breeder, I'll make a general supplies and say that we've gone over dosing and all that, and put that in their account and make notes that I've taught them how to do that. So there are ways around it that you don't have to bring us into the vet every time. Also talk to your vet about home visits and house calls, and if they'll do like hourly charging, because sometimes I'll do that where I'll just charge you by the hour and then supplies as opposed to charging an exam fee, because I can examine like 15 snakes in time to examine one dog sometimes. So it's just different. It depends on who you're working with.
I have an amazing vet that comes to my house and helps me with everything that I need. Yeah, it's great.
And then the other thing I was going to touch on too, and I don't know if someone will bring it up or not later, they might, but it's always good to have Vaseline or KY, like just lubricant, the plain. We're not getting nasty, people, just the plain water-based lubricant. I don't need to know what else you do with your fetishes. It's cool. I don't need to know about it. But for prolapses, because that's really good to have on hand.
Yes.
Yep. And then a smaller bag of sugar, like white sugar, that can help pull edema out of prolapse tissues by sprinkling sugar on top of it. So that's a nice thing to have. Just keep it separate from the sugar that you're baking with, because that's nasty. Don't do it. Put it in a separate container.
Yes.
But those are nice things to have that you can get over the counter from a prolapse standpoint too. Quick stop. So if you have like a bleeding situation or a bleeding tail stump, you can put a little quick stop on there. That can help. I feel like that's pretty all encompassing.
That's good. Yeah.
Oh, that's the other random things. For opening mouths to administer medication, tiny rubber spatulas, old hotel keys, old bank or credit cards, tongue depressors. Those all work really nice. And then you can order oral speculums for reptiles online.
I was going to say, I have some. I have different sizes. They almost look like slides, right? Like slides, but they have a hole in like the middle of them.
Put the medication
and they come in different sizes for different appropriate mouths.
The best one for some of the lizards, guitar picks, because they've got that nice narrow point at the tip, and you can get that right into that front lip.
Yep.
Yeah.
Look at you doing gangster shit.
Yeah, I always love going into your office and like your room, and you open the drawer, and there's like guitar picks, like random stuff in there that you're like, you know,
use it all the time.
God, yes.
I tell people, next to military individuals, exotic veterinarians are the most MacGyver motherfuckers out there.
Hey,
because they do not make medical equipment for animals you treat. You usually have to makeshift some bullshit out of some human stuff.
I've jerry-rigged more stuff than I can explain.
I watched a guy, a doctor, he's operating on chinchilla that had broke its wrist, fell off its ledge. No pins they were all too big.
Yep.
So he had to find the smallest gauge hypodermic needle he could. Clip it with some wire cutters and use that.
I've done that. I've done it in a small parakeet. I've used like an 18 gauge needle and threw it in the autoclave and then just popped it down in there. There's these cool little things that you can use in birds of prey. They use them in human medicine. I don't know what they use them in human medicine for, but they're shuttle pins. So real small. And you can use those to help repair fractures in a really small site as opposed to using a whole IM pin. And then a lot of those birds become releasable too. So
that's good. So when I moved to North Carolina at the end of the year,
you should go to the Raptor Center.
Been there. I used to be stationed at Fort Bragg.
Oh yeah. See, I worked there for 2 summers.
Oh shit, that's what's up. Well, it's great. It's great if you're not in the Army there.
Yes.
That place fucking sucks. So, I am putting in 2 aviaries. One is going to be for an owl. So I'll definitely be giving you that asking you for that 30-minute consultation.
For sure.
But you can go ahead and answer Tracy's question, and then I have a question about a prolapse, because that seems to be a semi-common thing in the ball python industry. So I can answer that.
Yes.
So there are some medicinal properties to cabbage. I actually use it a lot in mastitis cases because it helps with fluid and it has some soothing properties. I don't think it would hurt anything to try it. I think if anything, it would pull out edema. And I mean, people talk about all sorts of topical stuff like turmeric and ginger and all of that. But exactly. Yeah. So it can't, but I think in animals and in people, it's more pulling out that edema and the fluid. And then secondarily, the infection will follow a lot of times with a little bit of extra help. But I don't think it would hurt anything to try it.
Yeah, I know when we, I'll let you get to your prolapse question there, Brandon, but I know when I don't know, Lauren, if you ever saw a Trooper, our dog that got drugged behind the pickup truck, and
I don't know if I did.
Yeah, so anyway, we had a dog that got drugged behind a pickup truck, and from toe to elbow and toe to like knee on the back, completely gone, pretty much, and we did honey bandages on him, and that was
honey's great.
Shoot, that was 7 years ago, so that was kind of it wasn't a new thing, but it was just starting to gain popularity, I guess.
And you got to make sure it's medicinal honey.
Yes.
Because there's a difference. Don't just go grab like the little bear jar. Like it's Manuka honey. It's a medicinal honey. But it is becoming more and more available, and that can be very helpful. One of the other things we use at the clinic a lot that not a lot of places have is cold laser therapy. So it's infrared heat that gets deep tissue penetration and helps promote tissue healing, helps with deep tissue inflammation. I've used it on some live prey wounds before. It's worked really nice for that too. So he went from needing a whole leg amputated to needing 2 toes amputated to getting nothing. Yeah. So I mean, it did some amazing stuff. But I'm not a woo doctor, if you want to call it that, right? But I do think they're, like you said, using it to pull fluid and then following up with something for a secondary infection and stuff like that. There's definitely a lot of properties and for
things
sure
like that, for sure.
For sure. And most exotic vets are very hybrid model when it comes to like Eastern and Western medicine. Yes. A lot of dog cat vets don't do that necessarily, but I'm willing to try. I think it's just because we live off label. So it's like, listen, I'll try.
And I think you're so much more open-minded because you see so much stuff that maybe you've never seen before, or you've seen very few, or there's just not a lot of information out there.
Absolutely.
So it's like, hey, shoot, you want to try it? Like, you heard it worked on this? Sure. Like, let's
try it again. That's fine with me. Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, Brandon, what was your prolapse question?
Okay. So I do pretty much everything myself unless I can't. The only time I ever go to see my vet, and I love my vet, he's a good buddy of mine, is when I need prescriptions.
Yeah.
Okay? Can't do that.
Which you have to, and I'm just going to say this out loud, in order to get prescriptions, you have to have an annual established veterinary client-patient relationship.
Yes.
If you have not been to your vet in a year, they're not going to give you a prescription.
Yes. And I was going to throw this out there too. Brandon, I know you do a lot yourself. You don't go to the vet unless you have to. But you and your vet have a very good relationship, and you do phone call consultations and things like that, which is big different than like never talking to your vet and then all of a sudden going and getting something. So you might not see him for every issue, but you're still consulting, you're still talking, you're still going through things. So
and I go up there, he lets me like watch.
Sure. I guess it's like there's that gray area, right? Where it's you are still a client, but you're not bringing in all 50 animals every time you get a little rat bite, right?
Right, exactly.
I'm sending you pictures. I'm like, hey, dude, look at this. I think it's fine. Probably not a big deal. You're like, yep, I've seen 10 of these from you in the past 5 years. We'll make something.
You can handle it. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
So the prolapse thing is I've only ever had one snake prolapse on me ever.
Okay.
and it was a hatchling. It was a juvenile. I think I just got it. And so I had to have it euthanized. Unfortunately, there's nothing we could do. It was bad, a bad prolapse. And it is, like I said, a semi-common thing in ball pythons. So what causes a prolapse? And myself as a breeder, is there anything I can do here without going to the vet to fix it?
Sure. Okay. So the prolapse situation is complicated. Sometimes it's dehydration. So they're straining to pass a very hard fecal. That can happen quite a bit. In the youngsters, I do think there's a correlation with intestinal parasitism, whether that be a overgrowth of protozoa, pinworms, roundworms. I mean, those are the ones we'll see the most often. I've even had rounds of tapeworms in some of these younger ball pythons too. Yep. And I've seen that. Yeah. I know, right? And so it itches and is uncomfortable, and then they'll strain to defecate too, right? So that's part of it. Or reproductively, it's when they're just hormonally active and have no release of that, right? So that's part of the problem. So there's many causes. It just kind of depends on how it shows up. So it's a good idea to, if you have any animals that are suspicious or a fecal seems off or whatever, take it into your vet, let them look for intestinal parasites, because that's something that's easily treatable. Most of the time you can do it at home. If not, your vet will do like a gavage tube and feed down into the stomach the deworming medication, because they're not always the most compliant in snake land. But it's fine. We make it work. And then if they prolapse at home, one of the biggest things you can do to save the tissue, take all the substrate out. So get rid of all your mulch or chip or combo or whatever. Just put down paper towel or newspaper, and then moisten that paper towel or newspaper, because the more moist the tissue stays, the longer that tissue is going to be viable. So if you can't get it back in, it's going to give your vet a better chance of getting it back in and saving it. Sugar to help reduce the inflammation, lubricant on the outside to help reduce the inflammation, soaking, those sorts of things. There aren't a lot of, if it needs surgical intervention, then there's just not a lot of great options for you to do at home.
That's what I figured, because it's borderline of death.
Yeah, it can be. And it depends on what prolapse is too, right? Like a hemipene prolapse is much less detrimental than a lower reproductive organ prolapse on a female. That those two things just aren't equal. Like I can just amputate hemipenes, and it sucks because they won't be able to breed, but they'll still be a functional snake.
They'll be alive.
Yes.
So, female's a little bit different. I would say as long as you keep things damp, as long as you try to get that tissue swelling down, sometimes they will reduce on their own spontaneously. I've had that happen depending on how far it's prolapsed. But if it needs surgical intervention, there's not a whole lot you can do at home necessarily.
That's what I figured, because usually when people are like, hey, I got a female's egg bound, I can walk you through egg implosion and palpation.
Yep.
I can pretty much do all that I need to do up to a level 1. I'm the level 1. Right. So prolapse, I'm like, vet, go to the vet.
Yep. And sometimes it's crazy. Like I had a tree python have a really hard urate and I don't know why. I don't know if he got a larger size prey item than he did last time, and it was a lot of hair in there. But I mean, he prolapsed probably 3 inches of his distal colon. And then the hairball or trichobezoar, if you want the technical term, was adhered, and I had to remove it and then stitch the lower colon back together, plus stitch it back in. And so, it really just depends on the level of severity, how in depth it needs to go.
Right.
Yeah,
and that snake is still alive and doing fine. But
awesome.
That's there you go. Very few, I'd say. 9 out of 10.
Yep, that snake's alive and doing great. So
that's awesome. So what is your craziest story working in exotics? And what was your most fun experience? So I want both.
Okay. That's a tough one. Let's see. This is a good one. I gotta think back.
I'm glad. I wanted a question that would make you think. This is my goal, guys. I'm like, I'm going to stump my vet.
I know. Well, I mean, I see a lot of
crazy. Not even that, because it's not an actual, like, medical.
I see a lot of crazy on a daily basis, so that's the thing. Yep. Let's see.
And it doesn't have to be reptile related. You know, it could be the zoo. It could be anything. Yeah. It's a situation that has kind of like stuck with you through your career.
Sure. Well, the giraffe calf at Niabi Zoo, I mean, that's probably the craziest thing I've ever done. So in 2015, we had a giraffe calf born, perfectly healthy, no problems. And then this is all public record, so it's not like this is a big secret.
Right.
Yeah. There's a press release. We did the whole thing. It got stepped on by its mom. And it was really having trouble weight bearing on its leg. And we did x-rays. There wasn't any bony damage, so it was soft tissue damage. And so we did a lot of management of him for about 5 months. So it's a baby giraffe. He's about 115 pounds. He's about 5.5 feet tall. They don't really make splints for that. Yep. So I took some 4-inch PVC and cut it in half and created a splint with PVC Coban and duct tape, and splinted his lower leg and tried to do that to give him some support in case it was just soft tissue inflammation, give him time to heal, change the bandage out every 2 days. He did well with that for a while, but his growth rate was so rapid. We actually ended up getting, there's a company that makes splints for horses. They're called Kimsey splints, and they like point the toe of the horse so they can't put weight on a fracture.
Yep.
So we called the company and sent them measurements with a Kimsey splint and had them custom make us a flat metal splint for him to get him more time and more mobility. And now we have like a 250-pound animal with like a robotic foot running at us as we're trying to restrain him, change his bandage every couple days and all that. We did laser therapy. We did range of motion. I did water therapy, consulted like 15 different equine vets about different things related to the hoof anatomy and whatever. In the end, we unfortunately did end up having to euthanize him because the injury just wouldn't fix itself. I was 8 months pregnant. That was super fun for me.
Yeah.
It was super
remember
emotional.
This whole,
super emotional as it was. And we took him down to U of I for an autopsy, and it ended up that one of the ligaments on the inside of what was essentially his wrist, it was shredded. Like there was no way we were going to fix it. The only way we would have been able to fix it was to do a joint fusion when I was consulting with an orthopedic surgeon. But here's the kicker. You have to be 90% full grown.
Right. I was going to say, I imagine with the age, that would have been impossible.
It would have been impossible.
The growth rate. Yeah.
But I learned
it's
so
almost like the split bone in the horses, dude.
Yes.
I mean, like that piece of shit bone that doesn't even do anything.
Doesn't have a purpose. Yeah.
Yes.
So it was very interesting. I learned a ton. I did a lot of stuff that's never been done before, and got to present all that, which was really interesting. So that's probably one of my most impactful cases that I'll stick with.
And at least you had an answer at the end, right? Absolutely. It wasn't just like
even though
what happened.
And even though the answer was not an answer I wanted, we didn't want to euthanize, but for him, he would have never survived. It would have been a horrible thing for him long term. So that's kind of crazy. I would say one of the craziest things I've ever had someone bring in. Squirrels are not pets. Let's not
I love it.
Let's not put whipped cream on a turd and just call it good. Like it's just not, they're not a pet. And so she brought it in and she wanted me to neuter it. And I said, do you have a permit for rehab or education? And she said, no. And I said, then you need to get rid of the squirrel. And it was not pleasant. And she's like, well, just pick him up. I said, I'm not going to do that because he's going to bite me because he's a wild animal. I said, I'm going to sedate him. I don't want you to sedate him. I said, well, I'm not examining it. It got a little ugly, but he's like biting her through the cage, you know, and I'm like, you need to report that you got bit by this because we need to talk about what that means. And it just ended really ugly. And that was probably one of my craziest. Most people aren't ugly with me about it. Like, there's a level of ignorance there. And there's also a level of good Samaritan. Like, I really want to be helpful for this. And it's like, there are just some things like this time of year is always hard. In the land of wildlife, leave it alone. Like, just
possums, raccoons,
leave it
yeah.
They're wildlife for a reason. Now, if it's super injured and you want to do something humane and bring it into a veterinarian for them to take care of that, exceptionally reasonable. If beyond that, call a rehabber or just let it be. Nature is nature.
Not 9 times out of 10, it'll be fine on its own. Like, you know, I'm really good friends with rehabilitators around here, and they're like, they'll bring us rabbit kits and coon pups, and it's like, they are fine if you just leave them. Their mommy will come back. They will find them. They will get them. They are not. The fawn
that is in your yard is not abandoned. I guarantee.
Yes, it's here. Yes, yeah, for sure. Now, if like you find something on the side of the road, or it's a little bit of a different story, but exactly for the most part, just. You know, if it's not in an area where it's going to get hit by a car, someone's going to come around and bother it, whatever. It could be like picked up a snapper off the side of down here by South Park Mall the other day, you know, and there was kids down there trying to grab it by the side. I literally drove by, saw them, and was like, "Don't touch it," because they were trying to pick it up like this. I'm like, "You're going to lose a finger."
Yes, 100%.
Picked it up. Very easily, people could be like, "Oh my gosh, there's no way this turtle lives around here." Yes, it does. It lives in those little waterways. It's fine. Took it, put it back. Very easily could have, you know, it was good size. It was about 15, 20 pounds. Very easily could have taken it home and been like, "Oh, you know, whatever." I see people do it all the time. Leave it alone. Leave it be. Put it back where it goes. Get it out of traffic. And leave it be. And don't pick it up if you don't know how to do it properly, because they can and will bite off digits.
100%.
Like, absolutely.
100%.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I carry snake hooks and shit in my car in case.
Yeah.
Because around here in Oklahoma, we have a lot of hogs.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
So I'm always removing rattlesnakes and shit. Just
See you later.
All right. So, what do you think of reptile enrichment?
Yeah.
And what are some good forms for like broad spectrum species, like you know, snakes, especially snakes? I feel like it's hard to find enrichment for
I think a lot of the enrichment has to do with like the natural husbandry of the animal, and I think you got to remember that part of it, because not all of these reptiles want human interaction. So let's start there. And you know, there are some that are more human inclined than others. Some just need to be left alone. Like you just need to accept that it's a display animal. Just accept that. You'll be happier. They'll be happier.
It doesn't want to cuddle. It doesn't love you. It's not loyal. You know, leave it be.
Actually, the Facebook group, the Reptile Enrichment and Training Group, is actually pretty legit. I like that page a lot. I don't always love Facebook pages for things, but they do a really nice job.
They do.
I think for snakes, a lot of times less is more. I do like some of those snake pegboards. I think those are interesting to let them climb through and give them different climbing structures. I think that's really neat.
For people watching, you know, I think especially like my boa species and even some of my bigger python, like my white-lipped and my olive python, you can tell there's more going on up there. You know, ball pythons are pretty happy. They can burrow under their substrate. They're like, this is great.
So, and if you want to do anything for them, you could put like PVC underground or create little things like that. But the ball python, they just want to be left alone. And like your ball python's not eating because you're touching it. Just stop touching it. Leave it alone. I mean, like, I hate to be that way because you go to get it and you want it to be a pet, but it's like, just put it back.
Quit playing with your balls.
Yes, they're introverts. They like selective touching. They just leave them alone.
Yes, the thing I love to tell my customers is they are the pet rock. I mean, they are literally, they will sit there, they do nothing. If you don't ever see it, it's the happiest thing in the world. It's outsourcing all the time. It's stressed out. You're just going to get it. It's going to be really pretty. If you want to get it out once a week or something for your kids to hold, like for 10 minutes, sure, and then put it back.
For a lot of the lizard species, I like to make them work for their food. So, you know, for my bearded dragon, she hates it, but I'll like put in a whole bell pepper and like shove sticks of other veggies and fruit like through it so she has to pull it, or she can move it around to eat. I'll hang stuff from like clothespins at the top. I'll put stuff in a wiffle ball where she has to knock the wiffle ball around to get produce out of it. Like stuff like that is good because that more mimics natural behaviors. A lot of the monitors that have the long tongues or the long arms that like to reach into bark to get bugs, you can actually use like you can order test tubes on Amazon and things like that and get the fake cork board and put those in and then put the bugs in there and they'll like reach in and stick your tongue in there and dig for the animal, for the prey, and you can hang it that way.
PVC works for that sometimes too. A lot of times you can make PVC with like a couple on each side, drill some holes in it.
Exactly.
And then,
And even some of those like open like mesh soccer ball toys for the dogs. I can't remember what they're called, but those I like for a lot of the tortoises and stuff too, where you can shove chunks of produce and remain in there and they'll roll it around and pull it out. Like I do think that stuff is very mentally stimulating for them. I think a lot of them enjoy it. I think outside time is nice for some of them. Just use your judgment. You know, but I think a lot of the tortoises and such like the outside yard time, a lot of the bearded dragons do, and they'll just more hang out instead of run off. Some of the snakes like the outside time, you just got to watch it because they're faster than you ever think they are once they get outside. But I think a lot of the climbing boards for a lot of the boas and some of the bigger pythons, I think are nice. Like hanging hammocks, I think are nice too for some of the more arboreal species to give them another place to be. You can make that out of like upholstery fabric and PVC. Those work pretty nice. But, you know, I think it's important. I think it's an underdeveloped area. I think that there's a lot that still needs to be learned about that. But I think if you're basing your enrichment decisions off of the natural history of that animal, it will be beneficial. Basically, anything you can do to mock natural behaviors in the wild is enriching. That's the easiest way to think of it in my mind.
Yeah. One of my most favorite that I've seen that I really love, and I'm planning on mimicking it for our monitor once we get him in his bigger enclosure, is I actually think it was a Komodo because I'm pretty sure it was at a zoo, but they had like a teeter-totter log, and then they hung the prey above it. And I mean, you watch this Komodo like 45 minutes messing with this before it finally gets a bite of the food. I think that's one thing that people underestimate. Like they almost feel bad, right? Like the animal keeps trying to get something and they keep missing, and they have to, you know, eventually they're just like, oh, that, you know, that makes me feel bad. He's trying to get it and he can't. I'm going to give it to him, right? But we have to remember that is the mental stimulation part of it. You 100%. Know,
I mean, and that's why I have fights with bearded dragon owners on a weekly basis, where it's like, stop feeding it every day. Stop it.
Yes.
Like you should have 2 fast days a week. You just should. It's better for them. It's better for their metabolism. It better mimics things. You know, do 2 days of bugs, 3 days of salads, 2 days off, and just accept it. Find a schedule that works. I don't care what it is. You need to fast them once in a while because it just mimics that natural behavior. It's the same sort of thing. Like, yes, it sucks that it didn't get the prey the first time, but it needs that mental stimulation. So
yes, exactly.
You know, it is beneficial in that regard.
Yeah, and of course, again, like keep it safe. Don't make your bearded dragon climb 3 feet up in the air and then try to jump off a platform and it falls. You know, keep it safe. But if they take a little tumble here and there, it's not. They're not going to snap in half. Unless they have metabolic bone disease, and then you're doing something wrong anyway.
100%.
But I also think about the benefits of the bioactive because we fast our beardies. Probably more often than we should, but they're in a bioactive setup where what that happens then when we mimic that and we start fasting them is they start digging and they start grabbing the bug and the isopods and the bugs that are in the bioactive setup.
Which is perfect.
And yes, exactly. I mean, I'll even feed them sometimes where I'll just put the bugs in there and like make them dig for it. Like
100%.
The bugs can't get out of their enclosures, so who cares, you know? I'm pretty sure I have a breeding population of dubia roaches in my female beardie's tank, and I'm just like, sweet,
whatever.
Like unlimited food for her if she gets a hold of it, you know? It's not a big deal. So
absolutely.
But
that's good shit.
So I mentioned this one earlier, and I know you said that you had not heard of this vet, but you'd had some experience in this.
Oh,
yeah. What are your thoughts on Dr. Noel Fitzpatrick's advancements in prosthetics for animals? If you don't know who that is, what is just your experience or your opinion on prosthetics
so,
in animals?
I know who he is, and I just haven't watched it yet. I think the prosthetic idea is interesting. I think there's a part of us that always wants to save everything. And so sometimes that can be more detrimental than helpful. That was something that was brought up, like with the giraffe calf, actually, that like, well, why didn't you just amputate his leg and get him a prosthetic? It doesn't always work that way.
Yeah.
For him, it would have made no sense. It just would have made no sense. It would have not been a good quality of life. Long term. I think there are things that do make sense. I think prosthetic limbs, I think aspects of that can be helpful depending on the lifestyle of that animal. Mm-hmm. I think, there's a couple sites where you've got like tortoises on like Lego wheels to help them get around and those sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that a good quality of life? I think that very much depends how the tortoise is set up.
Yeah.
Right? And what his lifestyle is and how he can be taken care of. That's not realistic for everybody. So I don't think that chastising people because we didn't go get a prosthetic makes the most sense either. I think it can be beneficial for things like beak injuries and trauma. I've seen some of those, and I think that's excellent. I think that's very helpful. I think it buys time until normal beak grows in if it can. I think that can be helpful. I am totally about like in tortoises and turtles in general, plastron and carapace reconstruction. I think that those aspects of prosthetic pieces while things fill in make a ton of sense. I think that's very smart. I think there's aspects of it that work from a mobility standpoint, depending on the species and how they ambulate. I think it just really depends on the scenario you're in. I think it's very interesting. And I think there's a lot of stuff that makes sense. Like they made a new casque for a hornbill at one of the zoos that had gotten fractured and his sinuses were exposed. Like that makes total sense to me. It fits. He doesn't need it to defend himself. It can be fake and still give him a good quality of life. Like all of that I think is very neat. And that's how I feel with the turtles and tortoises with the shell injuries. You're buying them time until that stuff grows in. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think if we're doing it to give us more quantity of time than quality, that's where I think that it's a little skewed.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. 100%. I've never seen personally, but I've seen a lot of research to be done with like horses and prosthetics. And I'm like, I'm sorry, they cannot. I mean, no matter how good,
and
no matter how good your prosthetic, and then just the amount of weight and pressure that is being put on different parts of the body that should not be because of wherever the limb ends and the prosthetic begins.
The anatomy is totally different, right? Like the way they ambulate as a quadruped is significantly different than how we ambulate as bipedal. And they don't have opposable thumbs. They have two toes, like they have one toe. There's these things in the livestock versus bipedal versus domestic. You have to just kind of take all that into consideration. I mean, a horse literally walks on a finger. Like that's
technically.
I mean, that's what they do.
It is. It's one toe.
It is one toe. They walk on a middle finger. That's what they do.
Yeah.
So trying to compensate for that is very challenging.
Yes.
But I think they have their place. I think there's stuff about them that can be very beneficial when used in the correct situation.
Yeah.
So that was my question, and it was honestly what made me ask it was I saw Noel Fitzpatrick do some fucking miracle worker shit, and I know you guys are not. You cannot wave a wand and magically fix every animal, right?
Right.
So this guy brings in a dog. I think it was a lab or something, and it hadn't walked in 3 weeks. Back legs totally immobile, front legs totally immobile, and it turned out that there was like a bulging disc and a cracked vertebrae, and they were putting pressure on the nerve so the legs couldn't move. So what he did was he took all these x-rays from different angles, 3D printed a new vertebrae, took the old one out, ground it up. I can't remember. I think it's titanium. What's the metal that fuses really well with bone?
Yep, titanium.
So he puts some titanium in there, hammers the new PVC vertebrae in and everything, like really hammering it in there.
Yep.
Like, God damn. And after 3 days, the dog's like trotting around.
Interesting.
And so that was more my thing, is like you said, as far as canine and feline medicine and the reptilian family go, the gap is tremendous. You know, we don't have prosthetics like that for exotic based animals really at all. I just wanted to pick your brain on.
Yeah, I mean, and then you talk about the aspects of that aren't always realistic for people to pay for either, right? Like, that's the other part, because that's not inexpensive, and that dog is at huge risk for injury, other areas on the back along the way. And it's really lucky that even worked, and it's awesome that it did. I'm not discounting it in any
but
way.
it was a total risk that the owner took of experimental. Exactly,
And so the owner, and here's another thing Noel Fitzpatrick did, that he always does this, and when you do watch it, you'll see it all the time. And you made me think of it at the beginning of the show when you were like talking about how invested you are as opposed to the human counterparts. That dog that I just told you about, he was like, so that's going to cost you like 4,000 pounds or something. And they're like, we can only afford 2,000 pounds. And he's like, okay, I'll do it for 2,000 pounds.
Yeah.
And he covered.
Yep. And that's the hard part, right? Like, that's why the whole profession is burnt out. Like, that's a huge part of it, is like, I can't tell you how many times I discount or whatever, because the animals don't have an advocate. I'm their advocate, you know, and that's, I have a really hard time when I know that something needs something and the owner can't get it. But like, this stuff isn't free either. Like, I can't keep the lights on if I don't charge anybody or anything either. So that's the challenge.
And I think people look at it like their health insurance, right? Like the health insurance, you know, that meant, you know, the hospital pays $5,000 and then they charge the insurance $30,000, and then the insurance decides that they're going to pay $26,000 and the hospital says sure. That's not how vet med works. I mean, you guys aren't buying this stuff for pennies on the dollar and then turning around and selling it for thousands, you know. And you don't have insurance companies that are overpaying and covering stuff.
One of the best quotes I ever saw, and I'm probably going to misquote it, but it's like, you don't pay $50 for 10 minutes of my time. You pay $50 because I can do this in 10 minutes.
Yes.
Like, because I have the knowledge to do this in a short amount of time. And like, that's not condescending, and that's not meant to be condescending. It's not meant to be arrogant.
Right.
I went to school to do this specifically.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, so that's the part where I think we struggle, and especially in the people wanting to do exotics, because there's a lot more death than the dogs and cats. Trying to deal with that. There's not as much known. It's very intimidating. And I think that people are they're nervous to get into it because they may not know where to start. And to be honest, I mean, most of my exotic clients are pretty cool, but like I said, like we talked about earlier, I am who I am. Like, I'm not hiding anything from you. This is what it is. And I, if I don't know something, I'm going to find out. So, you know,
we just recently went through this. I had a sugar glider pass away completely randomly. You know, completely randomly, and we tried a bunch of and I mean, I went and saw you, and you were just like, look, I don't really know what's going on. It was completely, very quickly downhill. Like, she was fine that night, and then that morning I woke up, and she was very lethargic and unresponsive. We did some preventative care. She perked up, and then all of a sudden just went downhill again, and you know, ended up passing away. But it's just it was very straightforward. We did what we could, but there was no like false hope, but there was no like being morbid about it either. Right? It was no like, I don't know, take it home. It is what it is. And we talk about this a lot. You know, I can pick up a phone and message you and within that, usually the next few hours, you are very quick to get back to me. Guys, come on. We talk about it just as breeders in the industry, how many messages we get every day and how we try to get back to, value that relationship. They will get back to you and appreciate it. And if one time they don't be like, oh my gosh,
Because, and how many times have we all done this? Because I'm notorious for it too. I'll like glance at something real quick and it says it's red, and then I'm like, oh God, like I was on a week later, like, oh my God, I thought I said something, it happens. Exactly. We're also human. Like,
I was just gonna say, you're human. There's only so many hours in the day.
Yes.
You have a booked full schedule for months for a reason. You are a busy person. When your vet makes time for you in an emergency situation, like, I'm not saying like be like, oh my God, but be grateful that they are taking away time from their lives and their family and their everything that's going on. I mean, I know Animal Family is open like an ungodly amount of hours a week.
7 a.m. to 8 p.m.
7. I mean, guys, come on. How many day practices? I know you guys do some emergency stuff on the side too, but how many normal vet day practices don't close before 5 o'clock?
Yep.
And open at 7 a.m. in the morning. It's just, it's crazy. So,
Lord, and I really, overall, I have very good clients, and there's always a few in every bunch that are just not always the most pleasant, but I don't have anything negative to say. I've got, especially in my exotic group, most people are just like, thank God someone will see us, and it's really nice. I don't really have a lot. But I don't know. I just think I'm a real person, like just like all of you, I'm a real person. I'm just very invested in the health of these things. That's all it is.
I always feel bad. Like, I'm happy and I feel bad sending you new clients because I know how busy you already are.
I like the new ones.
But I'm like, I don't. There's no one else. It's like I don't have anyone else to send you to, or at least that I trust in the area. Sure. Like, I know there's other vets that see exotics, but seeing exotics and specializing in exotics, there is a very big difference between those two words. Yes,
absolutely.
Sure. So we have one last question for you. I know we're pushing like 2.5 hours, and then we do like a quick reptile revolution round where we ask you like a bunch of fire off questions.
Oh God. Okay.
Real quick. Yes. Right. I'll put you on the spot questions.
Yeah.
The last one I have for you tonight. Yes.
Thanks, Alex. That's one of my PCAs at the office.
I love it. So how do you think the reptile/exotic community as a whole can improve?
Sure.
And what can the average keeper do to help?
Sure. So I think being willing to continue your investment by investing in their healthcare. I really think that's huge. Like, I can't tell you how many times that you want answers and then I give you options to get answers and then those options are declined. So if you want concrete answers, I can do that as best of my abilities, but I have to be able to do some diagnostics to do that. And so being willing to invest in diagnostic work, especially when you have sick ones in a large collection, is super beneficial. If you're investing that much into that group that you're breeding, invest the dollars into figuring out why something's ill before you lose your whole collection. I think that's hugely important and very underrated. Say the other part of that question.
And then what do you think? So I would think that would be more like keeper related, right? Keeper or breeder, right? Individual person.
Yep.
What do you think the reptile or exotic community as a whole can improve on?
Yeah. So that's my mommy.
I love it.
Yes. I think as a whole, just knowing that there are preventative care things that exist and that there are things you can do before you obtain a reptile that are going to make a world of difference. And finding a vet and finding good information on how to take care of that animal. I mean, if I could get more people to consistently do those two things, I'd be doing a lot more wellness checks and a lot less sick visits. So, I think that would be huge. You're already making the investment into the animal, make the investment into the knowledge of how to keep that thing as long as you can. I think that's huge.
So just education as a whole. The main, we have Brandon's got the shirt on at USARK, right? The United States American Reptile Keepers. You know, there's lots of groups like that, whether it's a local herpetology group or stressing the importance of healthcare and vet medicine in the reptile
industry. It hasn't been stressed. I mean, a lot of these guys weren't even considered pets. They were like hobbies, or people grabbed them from the wild and just had them and no one knew about them. We're behind the 8 ball in that regard, in health recommendations, in all of that. You know, I think as more and more of these guys are in captivity and are used for non-breeding purposes, the more and more it's going to come up about preventative ovarian hysterectomies. You know, that's a hot topic that's coming up, and doing preventative hysterectomies in the egg-bearing lizards to avoid egg-bound issues down the road and reproductive issues. It's a thing. It's a reality. But that's a recommendation that's been around in dogs and cats forever. Like, that ain't new.
Right.
You know, so we're behind. But the only way we're going to catch up is if we can get people invested in the healthcare of their reptiles, so that we can get the data to promote appropriate recommendations. That's how it's going to happen.
And I think that comes down to breeders and experienced keepers working alongside their veterinarians. I mean,
like, if you're selling an animal to someone and not telling them that they should establish vet care and get their husbandry right, then you shouldn't be selling your animals.
Yes.
Like, is that on the back of my certificate, Liz?
Yeah, right? 100%.
And I say that with dog and cat people too, though. If you're breeding dogs and not telling people that they should be seeking healthcare for that animal within the first few weeks of ownership and doing any sort of preventative care before you give that animal to them, you're not a responsible breeder.
Yes.
So
100%.
You need to do that. You know,
and I think part of that again goes back to the breeder keeper relation.
Absolutely.
With their vet, because how many times, guys, in the industry have we heard experienced long-term keepers or breeders say, oh, I've been breeding these animals for 30-35 years, I know more than my vet, or I know more than
here's the deal. I will never say that you don't know more about morphs, colors, actual subspecies, all that. You're always going to, because you just are. Like, I don't really care, aside from a few little genetic variations. I don't care what color your bearded dragon is. I just want to perform the medicine on it, whatever. And I think that's great from a breeder standpoint that you have all that knowledge, but and I'm sure the experienced ones, if they do have a good relationship with the veterinarian, have the medical knowledge, but you still have to have that piece.
Exactly. And I think, and you'll see a big difference though in the animals for the breeders that say that and the breeders who have a good relationship with their veterinarian.
Absolutely.
And I think part of it being too, like you said, there was not a lot of, think 30, 40 years ago, there probably wasn't a lot of information offered in the vet industry for these reptiles.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, these people are like, oh, I've been keeping up for 30 years. That's great. You probably know a lot of signs and symptoms, like this is happening, this is what's going to happen next. But why? What is the medical explanation on what is happening? That is where you can work with your vet and you can say, okay, look, I've seen this happen. This is the next step. This is the next symptom. And this is what happens at the end.
Absolutely.
If you can work with your vet in situations like that, they can start to run diagnostics and actually get to the bottom of why this is happening.
For sure.
Instead of just, okay, now we're going through the motions of this sickness or this illness or whatever the case may be.
So. And that's a big thing in human medicine I have an uncle who's an actual doctor. Human medicine is very symptom treating.
Yes.
And animal medicine is like, why does that happen?
Yes. Like if you go to a human doctor and say, I want to get my vitamin levels checked because I'm curious about this and that. And my response that I get is, well, do you have a diagnosis? So what do you mean? Like, do you have low vitamin D? And I said, well, how do I know if I have low vitamin D if you're not going to test it?
Yeah.
Well, and that's why the human healthcare system. So, oh my God, I could be on this soapbox forever. But why the human healthcare system is so screwed up, because they, for insurance, have to code it as a diagnosis in order for you to be able to claim it. But you can't get diagnosed until you get it's so screwed up. Be an advocate for your own healthcare, because they're only going to treat. Yeah. Unless you have a really good invested practitioner.
Yes. I had that issues with I've had the knee surgeries and all the fun stuff, I had for years, like I have pain in my knees and they just treated the pain. Like they're like, all right, well, we're going to give you this. We're going to put you in a splint, but they never like, why is this happening? And it wasn't until I figured out why that I ended up getting the surgeries, all that kind of stuff. But that went on for 7 years that they were just throwing pain meds at me pretty much and being like, if it starts hurting, put it in a splint for 6 weeks and then come back and we'll reevaluate it again. It's like, how often do you see that happen in the vet world? Like no dog comes in with a limp and they're just like, oh, we're not going to do, we did x-rays, we don't see anything. Here's this. You might do it because it might be a strain or something, but if it's a continued, like every 3 months they're coming back in.
But it's a pro and con from the human industry being so single specialty, right? Like, I'm your dentist, cardiologist, anesthesiologist, GP, reproductive specialist. Like that's also categorized that I think sometimes that gets lost in translation. So that's the other reason you should just come see me and pay your bill.
Yes, 100%. All right. So now we're on to our revolution rounds. They're not as bad as you think.
So much pressure.
They're so bad.
They're fun. They're fun, easy questions.
All right, ready?
I think so.
What's your 1 rep max for bench press?
My 1 rep max
for bench press.
I mean, when I was when I was a varsity athlete, it was 185. Now it's probably like 105.
Nice.
A Burmese python was the correct answer.
I'm sorry.
All right. How do you say it when we're talking about the candy? Is it caramel or caramel?
Caramel.
Yes! Yes!
He's from the same region as me.
Oh, yeah! That's the fuck I'm talking about. Good shit, Dr. Hughes.
I know, yeah.
I get real hyped when I win.
Yeah.
Favorite species to work with?
Ooh, dang it. I mean, snakes in general are probably my favorite to work with. And I'll tell you why. There's only one aspect of that animal that I have to restrain, and then I'm pretty safe. It's way easier.
I love it.
Yeah, that makes
it's like once the bitey end is controlled, I really don't have to worry about a whole lot else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're pretty straightforward.
That is a really good point.
Most of the time they're pretty compliant. I don't have to worry about anything.
They're usually pretty chill animals.
Pretty chill, yeah.
You're next, Liz.
All right. Do you have any pets of your own? And if so, like any reptiles?
Yeah. So I have a 140-pound Mastiff named Chester. I have a newly rescued Golden Doodle. I still can't believe
you did it.
Doodle. I did.
Wow. No.
He was 10 months old and dumped, so it just happened. His name is Archibald Henderson. And then I have so I've got 2 cats, Ramathorn and Jojo, and then a crested gecko named Petrie, and a bearded dragon named Clementine Rainbow Lollipop. So there you go.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Awesome.
Clementine Rainbow Lollipop.
Yeah, I have 2 kids. That's the answer to that.
Okay.
I feel you. I've got a black rabbit named Blackie.
Yeah.
I've got a yellow and white rabbit named Sunshine. I've got, it's kids, man.
It's kids. They're very literal.
I've got a chinchilla that bit her once and now is perpetually named Nippy.
Cute.
Like, that is it. Yeah.
It's perfect.
That's awesome.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
All right. So your shit tickets. All right. Over or under?
My what?
Shit tickets.
Shit tickets. I don't know what that is.
Toilet paper, shit.
Oh, I've never heard it called that in my life.
I haven't either. You're not
That's your
the first
army.
one.
That's your military spouse.
Over.
Okay, good. We don't trust under people.
I always answer this question with, if it gets put on the holder, I'm pretty fortunate.
Well, true.
Yeah.
Especially at the office. It's very, very rare that there's actually toilet paper on the roll at the office. So.
I love it. All right, last one. How are you revolutionary?
Oh, God. That's a very deep last question.
Right? Everyone hates it.
I mean, I don't know. I'm very pro, women. Oh my God. I'm very pro women in unconventional roles and roles of leadership. I think that that's very important. I think that women created many things, including life. So, I think they should be involved in many things and that they should be paid equally for their thoughts on the matter. But that's.
I also think that the
I agree.
gender pay gap should be even. Like,
Yeah.
no.
It should be based on skill, not on part.
Yeah, I don't give a fuck what your gender is. I care about the results you produce.
Absolutely, 100%.
It.
And I think it's very empowering for women empowering other women in roles of leadership because girls are mean.
Girls are mean.
Yeah, girls are mean.
This is awesome because you don't even know about this, but we've been dealing with a lot of this in the ball python industry this past week. I will have to fill you in because it's a controversial topic that we don't mind talking about here, but we don't entertain drama.
Sure.
Because I'm good with controversy for educational purposes, but we don't entertain drama. So I will fill you in on it, but I think it's awesome that you had no idea. Like, this is not a clue, guys. Dr. Lauren had no idea.
Live question. Yeah.
Yes, and so very awesome.
Cool.
All right.
Oh, we both clicked on it.
Oh my God.
Yes.
This is ridiculous.
It's so true, though. It's so true, though.
I love you all.
That's fucking badass, dude.
Yeah. Well, it's nice when your employees feel empowered with you. I think that's
yes.
I think it's great.
That is a sign of good management.
Yes, right? So.
For sure. If you feel empowered, but all your employees, don't.
Yep. Then it's a problem,
there's a power gap there.
I would empower my employees. Like, they come up to me and they'd be like, "Hey, Sarn, so and so said go do this," and I'd be like, "Yo, tell so and so to go fuck himself." Like, that's just sort of how I ran my guys. Like, that's I don't play that shit.
For sure.
We're all equals to get through the day. That's how I feel. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't do girls. Girls are bitches, man. I just
I mean, I'll do.
I think it's funny because it's like the women.
Lying.
Lying.
What do you mean? You don't play the Spice Girls and you don't play Beyonce when you're in the shower? What the fuck is wrong with you people?
Don't bring
women empowering women, remember?
Don't bring the queen into this. Leave her alone.
Oh man. Well, we ran this almost 3 hours. I greatly appreciate your time. Thank you so much. We had a lot of fun, a lot of really good information past this. So anyway, with that, you are free to go.
All right. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you guys so much.
Come back anytime.
Yes, I'm sure we will have you on again. So.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you. For real. And I'll call you when I decide to get the owl and maybe for a dwarf caiman and possibly also a colony of bats.
Sure.
Yeah.
I see.
And he'll pay his consultation price.
Yeah.
Yes, sounds great.
Listen,
awesome. Thank you guys.
I'm putting $15,000 into a dwarf caiman enclosure.
Ooh, neat. That's cool. I love that.
Where I'll pay my consultation fee.
Yeah, right. $50,059 for my dwarf caiman enclosure. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Nothing but the best.
Thank you, Tracy. Yes. All right, Lauren, I'll let you go. I know it's late because you're.
Thank you for your time, Dr. Hughes. You're the fucking best.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Bye. Bye.
That was pretty good.
That was awesome. Lots of amazing information passed around there. Lots of fun.
I feel like I talked to someone who is intelligent enough to actually have a conversation with me. Not saying that I'm smart or anything.
No.
I'm a high school dropout with a GED, man. Like, I'm not smart at all, but I really absorbed all 3 hours of this, and I'm honestly leaving smarter than when I sat down in this chair.
Right.
Which is good, because a lot of the time it's like, wow, this person makes me want to go do drugs because they're so fucking stupid. Dr. Hughes is the shit, man. We got to have her on. And like, what we should do is we should have her on and then put her on the thing we were talking about.
Oh, yeah, maybe. We might have to do that for sure.
I think that would be a good one.
Yeah, I think that would be a lot of fun.
You guys will see in 6 months.
Yeah, you'll find out. But no, and this just goes back to guys having a good relationship with your veterinarian to be able to have someone who can answer those questions at the other end of the phone. You know, it makes all the difference. It really does. You know,
I'll tell you, I'm so close to making 6 figures a year off just like, the snakes, and I would not be able to support myself or be in business if it wasn't for my veterinarian.
Oh yeah.
1,000%. Dr. Brad Minson, you're the fucking man. You better watch this, goddammit.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree. She's super excited. She's always up for education. And I think it's really important too to find a vet that's willing to learn. Like that is a huge thing, that's willing to be flexible and willing to look into different things and do ideas. Just like we were talking about diet changes and all the different species over the last 10, 15 years even,
100%.
We see so many people that are, and even in the breeder side of things, that are almost like a stuck in the past kind of thing, right? Well, like I did it this way for 10 years, for 25 years. It's like, all right, but we have learned, we have become educated. Having that invest in themselves even after they have their degree, right? And is willing to continue that education because things are always changing.
So I think that the degree is like the baseline.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like hands on the animals is where.
Yep, for sure. But anyway, with that, next week, I believe.
I was going to ask you before we got on. I was like, wait, who do we have next week? So I can't remember.
So I have to double check, so I won't announce it yet. Okay. But next week possibly might be on a Monday instead of a Wednesday.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm aware. I'm aware of who.
Yep. So we'll let you guys know. We'll be putting announcements out on the page. But yeah, thank you guys, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Later, nerds.